Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place we crunch the political issues and cut through the politician's spin. We have another fantastic show ahead for you this week. And my first guest this afternoon is Muriel Newman, the former ACT MP and the head of New Zealand's Centre for Political Research. We'll be discussing the rise of polarisation, separatism and overt racism in New Zealand politics, plus the state of the play in the polls. And then I'll be talking with Gilda Kirkpatrick about her recent soirees that she has hosted with various politicians, and plus we'll discuss her political journey and why she's become vocal and outspoken about the freedoms we all enjoy in New Zealand. And finally today, I have a chat with my buddies again about what they think about Winston Peters and his claim that Maori are not Indigenous to New Zealand, and their reactions to the scolding other politicians gave him. We're in the last 5 weeks of the election campaign, and things are getting very, very interesting, with polls showing a bloodbath for Labour. But the polls are also showing that the many minor parties out there simply do not have the grunt to make the 5% MMP threshold. Don't forget to send your comments to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
This past 2 weeks has been a perfect storm of polling disasters for the Labour Party. It started with the Roy Morgan poll, the Post poll, then the Talbot Mills poll. And remember, Talbot Mills are Labour's own pollster. And finally, the Taxpayers Union poll. And then on Monday this week, we had the News Hub poll. All these polls were saying the same thing. Labour's support has cratered from the 2020 election night high. The damage is immense. Approximately 50% of their support has disappeared, and it is literally sprayed everywhere. David Farrar told me on this show last week that he's never seen anything like it. Voters are choosing anyone but Labour. Now, when you get one bad poll, you can rationalise that. It might be slightly off, maybe a rogue. But 2 polls starts to seed doubt, and 3 polls starts demoralising supporters, and 4 polls just shows that the previous 3 weren't rogue or even slightly off. And when you get 4 polls in a week and then another one the week after saying exactly the same thing, then there really is no other option other than to accept that the polls are right. Now, for Labour, those 4 polls have to them, their MPs and their supporters, the information that tells them that we, as the public, don't love them anymore. They're unequivocal. They cannot be excused, explained, or even spun. They are what they are, and they say that Labour is doomed. What happens next, though, is that the last remaining swing voters see what is happening, and then they start to back winners, not losers. And then Labour's support drops again. Labour Party volunteers become dissatisfied, demoralised, and all of a sudden the party bosses realise that their pool of enthusiastic volunteers is really only a bunch of surly, disgruntled true believers. And you start to see that other parties have large amounts of supporters, and Labour can only muster a few true believers. The rot truly sets in, and support for Labour drops again. But there's worse to come. We saw the News Hub poll drop on Monday night, and it confirms the doom spiral the other 4 polls showed, and that Labour is toast. Now, the Herald usually runs at least one poll during the election campaign, and each poll further confirms how voters are moving, and hurt just keeps piling on. Chris Hipkins might think he's in it for us, but the voters know that they aren't in it for Labour, and the pain continues. The worse it gets, the nastier Labour will get. They're at the point where they've realised that people no longer are talking to them, that people would rather cross the road than be near the toxic red team, and the polls become self-fulfilling. In that sense, last week was the first comprehensive evidence for Labour politicians that they really should be dusting off their CVs, because in a few short weeks, they'll be getting the ask card from New Zealand voters. The only questions that remain, real questions, are how low can they go, and will they beat Bill English's 20.94% from 2002? But let's move the discussion to what the polls are also showing, and we need to ask what is the state of play amongst the minor parties. The polls are all in alignment. The minor parties, with the exception of New Zealand First, are a long way from being competitive. David Farrar told us that for a minor party to credibly claim that they'll be in the mix after the election, they need to be at over 4% at this stage of the election cycle. Top, the darling of the media classes, is not even close, and neither are any of the so-called freedom parties. And boy, there are a lot of them. And it also seems that various proposals for umbrella parties are falling on willfully deaf ears, and that's a real shame. Now, there's some that are pointing to what they call other polling companies that show a large level of support for some of those freedom parties. Now, don't be fooled. They're neither polls nor even remotely accurate. They may be well-intentioned, but people are clinging to those results, and it's a false hope that will be dashed by reality in the only poll that counts, Election Day. But ask yourself this: why do they not tell us how many completed their survey, nor the methodology used in the survey? Those are warning signs that you are looking at a survey and not a poll that follows agreed statistical methodologies for the accurate presentation of results. Self-selecting surveys are notorious for inaccuracy. And there are now so many real polls out there that the information is there for all to see. There is no excuse for hiding your head in the sand. And ultimately, shopping around for results that suit what you want to hear is an exercise that will leave a very bitter taste in your mouth. Which brings me to the claim that is being promulgated right now by one party leader that he's very close to winning the electorate seat that he's standing in. He's wrong. He knows he is wrong. RCR polled that electorate, and he was coming a very distant 4th place. He had more people recognise his name than indicated support for his party. But not content with that poll signalling what everyone except Blind Freddie could see, he commissioned another poll, deliberately couched the questions in a way he thought would deliver a better result, and he still was a long way behind the front runner. Strangely, he has never published the poll, nor the questions used, nor the results. But he's boasted on social media and in public meetings about the poll results that he says shows that he's winning or close to winning. But when challenged by the public in those public meetings to show his numbers, he claims he's not in a position to do that. Well, why not? If it really says what it says, surely you'd publish it so everyone knows you're speaking the truth. What has he got to hide? He's claiming he's there or thereabouts in his poll. Well, let's see it then. Proof is in the pudding. If you're leading a freedom party, truth is very important. Leaders like this are misleading people. And that's hardly going to inspire confidence in them or their party, especially if the results on October 14 show that the public polls were right. It's our job here at Reality Check Radio to actually deliver facts, truth, and have honest discussions. The clue is in the name of the station. The last point I would like to make in this lengthy monologue is this. There seems to be quite a lot of people thinking this leader or that leader is the new Messiah, someone who's going to lead us to the promised land, while they're hopped up on hopium and not dealing rationally with what is happening. Now, these people are good people, well-intentioned people, but utterly naive when it comes to politics, and they have a savior complex. They are a false hope. But if the leaders are false prophets with a savior complex, their most ardent supporters are at a whole next level of unreality. They shout down anyone who dares to inject a bit of reality into the debate and are literally sticking their fingers in their ears and shouting, la, 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 la. It is as unedifying as it is silly. But that's what they're doing. The morning after the election, they're going to realize they've been misled, and then the frothing and blame game will start. There's no saviors in politics. There's no messiahs. There's just a whole bunch of very naughty people. And that's the crunch of it all. The reality check is but 5 weeks away. Muriel Newman is a former ACT MP and a founding member of the ACT Party. She also runs the New Zealand Centre for Political Research. Muriel is very concerned with our political environment and the divisive nature of politics these days. She joins me now. Welcome to The Crunch.
Thank you very much.
Your political upbringing really started with the ACT Party, didn't it?
Yep, that's right. To be fair, I didn't really have much involvement in politics before then, except, like I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Whangarei. But that wasn't really politics as such. It certainly wasn't national politics. So it started really when we met Sir Roger Douglas. He'd been the Minister of Finance. He'd been sacked. We invited him to Whangarei to launch a book that my husband had written. The publishers wanted a book on how to make money following the share market crash to try and boost everybody's confidence. And Frank had written Making Money in New Zealand. Roger came up and launched the book. There were 1,000 people turned out to hear him make a State of the Nation address because he was the most controversial politician of the day back then.
Yeah,
and
sure was.
When he formed ACT, he sort of got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to become involved. So it was a journey of discovery.
Sure. And in 1996, you ended up as a list MP for the ACT Party in Parliament. And from there, you went on, you had 8 MPs at that stage. In 1999, went down to 7 MPs. And then in 2002, only 2 MPs, and you missed out after, or in 2005, it went down to only 2 MPs, and you missed out after that.
Yeah, it was, I think pretty much we were 8 and then 9 and then down to 2. And yes, I missed out. We could see it coming, of course, because that was the time where Don Brash had taken over as leader of the National Party, and a lot of people said he was more ACT than ACT. Yeah. And, our vote just switched across. So suddenly on election night, you think, right, what am I going to do now? And
so then you set up the New Zealand Centre for Political Research. and have been blogging, writing, doing policy work ever since then.
That's right. It was such a learning curve, to be honest, for me, going into politics and then into Parliament. Like, I learnt so much, and I realised that, most of the public never got that opportunity and never got the insight that, I had because of being there.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, one of the contributions I could continue to make was to actually try and share some of that insight. And yes, so that's been driving me for all these years.
I've always, never wanted to go into Parliament as a member of Parliament, because I've always viewed the system as being against the members of Parliament and their aims and ideals. And I've witnessed and, spoken to hundreds of MPs and politicians over the years. And, you see this idealistic zeal in their eyes and getting in there to make changes. But when they get in there, the system just grinds them down and it keeps on going and it never changes. Was that your experience of Parliament as well?
It's a bit difficult because we were always in opposition while I was there. So we were sort of helping to try and change things all the time. That was our focus. But we did used to talk every time there was an election or a new minister was appointed to a cabinet position. We did used to sort of observe how they went in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they either succeeded and the department was changed to deliver what they wanted, or they were ground down, and the system, as you say, it just carried on. And the number of ministers who had the ability to actually override the system, yes, it was quite limited, really. Most of them really never got to do, I think, what they really wanted to.
Yeah. In the 9 years or so that you were in Parliament, who stood out for you as a top MP or a top minister that impressed you in being able to get things done, irrespective of whether you agreed with their politics, their political leanings, or anything else?
Hard one. We're going back a lot of years now. I think it was some of the National Party leaders. Bill English would have stood out as Minister of Finance. He helped to underpin some of the welfare reforms, and then Judith Collins was the Minister of Welfare when a lot of those reforms were put in place. And I always saw that as being, a pretty remarkable achievement, really, because, number one, welfare reform is always difficult. And number two, they did it in such a way that it was clear to everyone that they were trying to help to improve the system. Yeah. Whereas mostly what happens is that opponents, they rebrand it as, trying to destroy the system and harm people. And I always thought that the way they brought in that social enterprise approach was very good. And it did actually signal what welfare reform was all about, was to make it work better, make the system work better, to give people a better chance at a better life. And that was always lost in the process. So Bill English, he was one. To be fair to John Key, I think he did quite a good job at the level of being able to inspire people. Yep. And inspire a country. I always remember reading a piece by one of the senior journalists from the Press Gallery about how they'd been at it was an Anzac service, and they'd said it was overseas, and it was an Anzac service, and they said that there was the crowd of people, and people were yelling out to John Key after the service had finished, and tumbling down over other people in their eagerness to get to him to be able to shake his hand. And the point she was making was that she had never, in all the years of following prime ministers around the world, she'd never seen that level of excitement at seeing a prime minister in real life, in the flesh. And I think he did have that impact. But then at a different level, there were loads of things that he did that were probably not very wise in retrospect.
Well, trying to change the flag was one of those. And I said to him at the time that he would lose that. He seemed utterly convinced that he would be able to convince the New Zealand public just by dint of his personality to change the flag. And part of his rationale was, well, the Labour Party has it as part of their manifesto that they want to have a referendum on the flag, so they'll support it too. And I said, you don't understand the Labour Party very well then, do you?
No.
They'll throw that to one side just so that they can stick pins in your eyes. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But
no, I think, because he was a new member of Parliament, I mean, this is the issue with Luxon too, because he was sort of an outsider. It takes a long time before you get that gut feeling about politics. Some people pick up on it very quickly, but for most people, it takes a while. And I think that as a new Prime Minister, he made, some really good decisions. But as I say, I think in some areas he was quite naive, and to the detriment, really, of the country in some areas.
Yeah, just touching again on Bill English. Bill English and myself and indeed my family have had a long-standing bitter feud with Bill English, which is really deeply personal. But on another level, the things that you were talking about that impressed you are the things that impressed me about Bill English as well, that he saw a need to have welfare reform, but needed it to be data-driven so that they weren't just throwing good money after bad, and that they were actually going to make a demonstrable difference, rather than just expanding this massive trough of cash into the welfare system. And I admire him for that. But it was strange because during the coalition negotiations between National and New Zealand First after the 2017 election, when it was raised by New Zealand First, they wanted to do further welfare reform. Bill English looked across the table, pointed at his cup of tea that he had in front of him and said, I would rather piss in that cup of tea than touch welfare reform. And I found it astonishing to hear that from insiders that were in that room at the time. How does that reconcile? I mean, you've probably just heard that for the first time, but this is a guy that actually devised some sensible welfare reforms, and now he was turning it down. I still struggle to believe that he did that, but I've had multiple people confirm it, that's exactly what he did.
The thing is that he put welfare reform onto a particular track. If you recall, there was a big review of welfare beforehand, and the review committee, Paula Repstock was the chairman from memory.
That's right.
The review committee came out with a list of quite difficult reforms, and he chose the track to go down, or he and obviously the minister, Judith Collins, and others. They chose the track that they were going down. They avoided a couple of the things that we thought they should have introduced, but nevertheless, it was a reasonable pathway. And all I can say in response to what you've just said happened around that cabinet table, my view would be that the system was on a track, and they would not have wanted a different type of policy reform to come in and take it off rail, take it off balance. And so in my mind, that would be the only rationale for that, because their policy reform, they'd only really just got it going, to be honest. It took a few years to sort of bed in, and there were going to be different stages to the process as time went by.
Yeah.
And I would assume that if you come in with some new ideas, you could very easily, derail it really, and he wouldn't have wanted that. So, that's my excuse for him. I hope that was it and not anything else.
It's ironic though, because by not managing to cut a deal, then you got wholesale welfare reform in the other direction anyway, by having Labor in charge and throwing billions of dollars at welfare.
It was so unfortunate what happened there. I mean, I can remember writing about, how the country had spoken, the country, they voted to stay on course with National.
Yeah.
And if you remember, we were called a rock star economy and, things were going pretty well in New Zealand. And so I think the expectation was that Winston would do a deal with National. And I think we were all pretty much gobsmacked when, he did the opposite. And no matter what the personal animosity was between them all, in a way, what I think everybody would have hoped is that the good of the country would have been put at the forefront of everyone's minds. And obviously, unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I've spoken to Winston about that. And he said, look, Cam, he said, the bottom line was this: National just wouldn't negotiate. He said, we reached out to them first. We felt that it was responsible for us to go and talk to the National Party first because they were the largest party. And it became very apparent very quickly on that whilst the members of the National Caucus and indeed some of the negotiating team wanted to cut a deal, and if you think about the stumbling blocks, it's been said that the Provincial Growth Fund was a stumbling block, because of the $3 billion. When you look at the spending that's gone on with the Labor government and the borrowing that's gone on, $3 billion is a rounding figure now. And
that's right.
That was the stumbling block, and if only Bill English had put aside his personal animosity, and that's what I've heard from people who were in the room from National and people who were in the room from New Zealand First, they all wanted to do a deal with the National Party. But the feeling over that week was that National wasn't negotiating. They wouldn't even play. And so he had no choice but to go with the Labor Party. And you're right, it was an unfortunate thing, given what's happened in the ensuing years and the billions upon billions upon billions of borrowings that we've got for zero improvement in any government services or outcomes in any demonstrable way. So it was a crying shame that happened. But there's no rules under MMP that says you have to go with that party or this party. It's whoever can command a majority of the House. And I think people still, even after 30 years of MMP, are struggling with the concept of how it all works. And that includes wasted votes. It includes how coalitions are formed. Do you see any particular way that we could improve the general understanding of the electoral system that we've chosen twice? Now, we'll never change it again. I don't think it'll change in my lifetime. But I can see a malaise. We get it in comments from people on the show saying, I don't understand what you mean about wasted vote or the effect of a wasted vote. And I'm sitting there shaking my head, staggered that after 30 years we haven't worked this out.
I think, number one, you're right. Everything you've said there is correct, that people understand they've got two votes. They understand that the party vote is the thing that determines the government. The wasted vote, I mentioned that in my latest newsletter, and immediately you could see people's hackles rising because, and I think education is the only answer, and I don't mean that sitting them down in the classroom. I just mean we have to keep beating on about it. We have to keep saying it, even if it's unpopular. Just looking, before I go back to that, just looking at the bigger picture, what I hope that negotiation in 2017 did was that I hoped it would act as a warning to any parties that have to negotiate a new government, that they have to put their own personal views to one side and they have to actually look at the good of the country. They have to say to themselves, is doing this deal or that deal going to be better for the country? Okay, that's the deal that's going to be better for the country. Now, how can I change their mind so I can get the things that I really want through? And it's got to be at that level where the good of the country comes first, because what happened at the last, that negotiation back in 2017 was that, the good of the kingmaker was probably put up the hierarchy higher than the good of the country. And so, unfortunately, and as you say, obviously there was difficulties trying to negotiate and all those things. But if you forget about the personalities involved and you just look at the outcome, the outcome was really bad for New Zealand. And so, I just hope that the political parties realise how bad things can get if we have a bad government, because I don't think any of us realised how bad it could, or how low we could go as a country. And then when you come to the actual mechanics of MMP, this business of the wasted vote, my view has always been, if you don't like any of the ones who are likely to govern, right, so you look at the polls and you look at all the ones over 5% or on the cusp, like 4.9, 4.8, or, in the fours anyway. Yeah. If you don't like any of them, you hold your nose and you vote for the one that you think will do the least damage to the country. That's the way you've got to go. Because if you vote for a party that's on 2% or 3% that hasn't got a hope of getting over the line, then effectively your vote is going to, it's binned, right? And then all the others are scaled up. But the effect is that your vote goes to prop up the parties that you do not like at all. And you are better to actually put your vote into a party that will make it, even if you don't like them. At least you don't support the bad guys.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing that I've been saying, and boy, has it exercised a lot of listeners, and I get all sorts of mail telling me I'm wrong about this. Well, I've been involved in politics all my life. I've been commentating on politics for over 20 years, and it sounds arrogant, but I'm not wrong on this, and you're 100% right. And I'd qualify that a little bit, and I'd say I would assess what the things are that are important to you and then choose a party that will give you most of those things. You're never going to find a party that you agree 100% on. And I'm sure you, as a former ACT MP, are sitting there looking at the ACT party now and thinking, well, that's not the party that I belonged to back then. But, the majority of the things that they believe in, the policies that they've got are there. And even though those things make me queasy a little bit, it's still better than the National Party or New Zealand First or whatever. And so you choose a party that is the least offensive to you. Yeah.
That's right. And the argument has often been it's not so bad now because I think people, number one, they're tuning in. This was the big thing, what we found, and you would have found this in your work over the years, that between elections, the majority of the population don't give a toss about politics, really. I mean, they watch what's on the news or read the headline, but they don't think too deeply about it. They go about their lives, and that is the thing that consumes them. But in election year, they start to check in. And the closer you get to the election, the more people check in. And so I'm pretty sure that by the time the election comes, a vast majority of New Zealanders have actually figured out where they're going to vote. Now, that doesn't stop the ones who choose when they're in the voting booth, because there's still a sizable number of those people. But in general, the interest in politics rises, and then people start to try and figure out, well, do I like this one or do I like that one? But there was a period a while ago where, the comments you got from everyone was, well, we don't like Labour and we don't like National, so what the hell are we going to do, as a country? Yeah. And my view has always been just wait, because by the time the election or the first lot of voting starts, the parties will have put out their manifestos. There will have been a lot more commentary on what they're promising, and then you are in a position where, as you say, you can have a look for yourself at which are the hot-button issues for you, and you can figure it out.
Well, exactly, and I guess we've seen that. Like up until about a month ago, the election was harder to pick than a broken nose. But now, after last week and the poll on Monday, it's 5 polls in the space of 7 days that have been released that all show that Labor's vote has collapsed. And it also shows, and that's something that David Farrar mentioned on the show last week, that he's never seen before in New Zealand politics, is that Labor's vote has collapsed and it's going everywhere. It's going to the National Party, it's going to the Green Party, it's going to the ACT Party, and it's also going to New Zealand First. And this could be an unprecedented election in terms of a party that won a majority, right, 50% of the vote, has seen their support cut in half in just 3 years. It's incredible, really, when you think about it.
But I think it's a reflection of just how bad they've been.
Yeah.
You know, and when you look at them now, there was a clip on the news the other night of Chris Hipkins standing with his supporters at a corner by a road, and they all had signs and everything. And when you look at them and you think to yourself, well, can they campaign on their record? No. They haven't got anything good on their record. Everything they've promised has either not eventuated or turned into a disaster, and they've even managed to ruin most of the public services that used to be working okay. And then you say, well, can they promise their way out of this election? And the answer is no to that as well, because they've got no credibility left. And so you think, well, what are they campaigning on? And the only thing they can campaign on really is, you know, you're a loyal Labor supporter, you've got to stick with us. But then will those people go out and vote on election day? And a lot of them won't.
There's no guarantee of that. But, you know, you're right. If you look at all of these massive promises that they've made over the last 6 years, you know, 100,000 Kiwi-built houses. But the reality is that if you sat them in a room full of Lego, they couldn't build a single house. You know, you had 1 billion trees they were going to plant. Well, we haven't seen a little counter on that, have we? There's nothing on that. You know, the new bridge across the harbour, across Auckland Harbour, where's that? Where's the light rail? These are massive policies that they set aside budget funds for that they've never achieved. What happened to that money? Did it get reallocated? You know, these are things that no one's asking in the mainstream media. Here's all these promises. And
where's all the hundreds of millions of dollars that have specifically gone to Maori projects? You know, you look at COVID, and the masses of money that went there. No accountability at all for any of that sort of spending.
Yeah, and you hear the National Party people saying, oh, you know, if Winston had only chosen Bill English. But hang on a second, the National Party opposed the Provincial Growth Fund of $3 billion. And if Bill English had been smart, he could have said, well, okay, we'll have a Provincial Growth Fund, but the lead minister is going to be a national minister so that we can keep tabs on where the spending's going. And that would have solved the problem. But for some reason, they couldn't get that through. But ultimately, you're right. The money that was spent with this COVID recovery fund is incredible, eye-watering numbers with little obvious benefit to the community. And I've just heard...
And you know that...
Yeah, I've just heard today that the New Zealand Transport Authority, or Waka Kotahi as this government likes to call it, has got this special fund that they call the Mana Enhancement Program, where if they're acquiring land for new roads or expanding a road or whatever, and the landowner of the land that they want to take is a Maori owner or a Maori organisation that owns it, then the compensation that they pay for that land is higher than if it was any other Kiwi. And on top of that, however much land they take that they're paying compensation at a higher rate, they also guarantee to give the landowner replacement land somewhere else. So they're paying almost, probably more than 2 times what the value of the land is in doing this, and preferring people based on who their ancestors are.
That's just shocking, that sort of thing. And, of course, it's rife now right throughout New Zealand, throughout our public service. I think that is one of the most despicable things that Labor has done, is divide society according to race. And when it comes to the health system and you hear that, 2 people are waiting for an operation and the one who's Maori gets chosen first rather than the one who's sicker, I mean, that makes you sick. It's just terrible. And the new government, if there is one, if these guys get booted out, then the new government will have to change all that sort of stuff. It cannot be allowed to continue.
That's what worries me, because I listened to Christopher Luxon come out, and, you know, Winston Peters on the weekend said that Maori are not Indigenous. And, you know, if you look at the oral history of Maori, apparently they came here in 7 canoes from various different places. They effectively were the first colonizers. It's in their oral history. Winston Peters says it, and has, to his credit, said it for years. The media leaps into that, and there's Christopher Luxon standing up saying that Winston Peters is wrong. And I shake my head and I think, are you really going to undo this co-governance stuff? Are you really going to undo this Maori wonderfulness, that the revisionist history of the treaty, everything else? Because it seems to me that Christopher Luxon is wetter than an otter's pocket and will actually buy into that woke agenda, and we'll see no change at all other than they're wearing blue shirts now, not red shirts.
Look, I think the issue is hugely important. It's hugely controversial, as we know as well. I think Winston did the country a good service when he reminded everyone that Maori were the first migrants and were not Indigenous.
Yeah.
Because obviously if they were Indigenous, they would have had to have been in New Zealand since the time the country separated from the other mass of the earth. And that, of course, was not the case. And so, you know, it's all semantics. They like to use the Indigenous claim because that gives them a moral authority that they don't actually have. They like to talk about this treaty partnership, which is a complete and utter fabrication. They've made it up, but it gives them a moral authority. And then they can go out and they can, you know, teach our kids all this false stuff, and they can use it to gain hold of resources and power and control, like you were saying with the Ministry of Transport and their compensation package. And so it's a path to riches for a certain small elite of Maoridom who've got their hands right on this whole tribal thing, and they're pushing it for all they're worth, and they're conning the country into thinking that they're looking after all Maori when they're absolutely not. It's a scam. It's a terrible, terrible thing that's been going on, and it's a sad indictment on a government that actually backs it and empowers it, and that's what's been happening.
I'm still staggered, though, by Christopher Luxon's attitude on this, saying, you know, just like, it's simple facts. And, you know, what you'd say too about the revisionist history of the Treaty of Waitangi, about this partnership, what they're wanting us to believe is that the Empress of India, the head of the British Empire at the time, Queen Victoria, agreed to a treaty with a group of people that were illiterate, had no technology, Stone Age technology. They couldn't even make pots. They didn't have pots. They didn't have metalwork. There was no wheel. Lived in Raupo huts. And she signed a treaty that said, you're on an equal footing with me. It defies belief that that's what they're actually telling us happened. And
well, you just got to say, who are the people who are actually swallowing that, you know, and they're the ones too who need to be held to account, because these things can only get a life and be empowered when a whole bunch of people back it. And, you know, what they've all done is they've backed something that is clearly a lie, and they've now sort of made it so that actually it is controlling. It's controlling public services, for goodness sake. It's what's controlling the new Three Waters program. It's what's controlling the health system, the RMA, you know, and it's right through the public service too. If you look at any public service website now, you'll find something about co-governance in there, something about the treaty partnership, how they're all signing up to it and aligning to it and trying to be better treaty partners. It's just awful what's been going on.
Yeah, it's this polarization and separatism that is, nastily been introduced into New Zealand politics by the Labour Party mostly, but also the changes that we've seen in the leadership of the Maori Party. When we had Peter Sharples and Tariana Turia as leaders of the Maori Party, that was a party that I could see myself voting for. I can't see myself voting for a party that's led by Debbie Ngāri-Wapaka and Rawiri Waititi. The things that they say are just the most appallingly racist things that they say, and they get away with it.
Isn't it terrible? So other people say things which are, all they're doing is questioning something, right, to do with Maori, and they're accused of racism. Those guys say the most outrageous things, and nobody blinks an eye. It's a terrible indictment of the mainstream media that's the approach that they've taken. And look, going back to Christopher Luxon, what he's come out and said is that, from what I understand, is that there should not be any co-governance of public services. Totally agree with that. And if he stands true to his word, what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to go through the whole public service, and he's going to have to take out all references to the treaty partnership, to co-governance. All of that stuff that Labour's put in is going to have to be stripped out. Now, what he has also said, which I don't actually agree with either, but nevertheless this is what they have done as a party, they still support the idea of co-management of some mountains and rivers and formerly public resources. Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, you just have to look at what Tūhoe have done down in the Ureweras, and, it's just turned into a disaster. But nevertheless, that was their policy, and so they haven't negated that, but Luxon has said that we will get rid of this stuff in public services. And I just hope, number one, he realises what a big job it is, and that, number two, he's up to the job and they do a thorough job.
Well, that's the problem that I have, is I don't think he understands the size of the problem. And if you look at his history with what he did at Air New Zealand, going all woke there, I can't see it happening. And the second thing is he doesn't have the political will to actually go through that and remove it and strip it all out and bring us back to, we're all the same. We're all Kiwis. And I think that we are still going to see this divisive, nasty, racist behavior going on and promulgated and pushed mostly by those on the left side of politics, but some of those on the right side of politics who go along to get along so that they can win elections and get that middle road of New Zealand on their side. And, none of this has ever worked anywhere in the world, going down a separatist path or a polarized path. It ends in tears, and it more often than not ends in blood. And that's what scares me the most about all of this rhetoric that is going on around the place that has really only risen its head in the last 6 years.
That's right. And, fundamentally what it's doing, all that stuff, is it's undermining democracy. And if you think about, democracy is sort of the cornerstones of freedom, they're the rule of law. And the rule of law operates on the fact that everybody is treated equally. And that's what co-governance doesn't do. It elevates one group of New Zealanders above the other and says you're the privileged lot. And so, I think that, for the sake of our democracy, there's a huge job to do. And it is about restoring equality. It is about restoring the rule of law. And so, my view is that the more voices we have speaking out about the need for those, the better. And, you, like me, must have despaired over the last number of years where the mainstream media weren't touching any of these subjects at all except to be critical. And of course we can put the blame there again on Labour and their blinking $55 million public interest journalism fund, which said you could only get the money if you promised to promote the treaty partnership.
Yeah.
And so, we've ended up with media being corrupted by the Labour government so that they wouldn't speak the truth on a hugely important policy initiative that was being played out undercover, of course, because the He Puapua agenda was kept secret by Labour during the 2020 election. Nobody even knew it existed.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, the moment they win the right to govern on their own, it starts being enacted rampantly, throughout everywhere. Every part of New Zealand started to see, Maori names, Maori words, just everything started to shift. And it was this unmandated agenda that they were rolling out. And the media sat and turned a blind eye.
They're in on it.
Yeah.
They're in on it.
Terrible. That's right. Yes, they were promoting what Labour was saying instead of being critical about what they were doing to democracy in New Zealand.
But we saw the media go in lockstep with the government over the pandemic and sold their souls. There was no critical coverage of the appalling human rights abuses that the Ardern regime perpetrated on New Zealand society, all under the guise of protecting Granny or, something else from a disease that has turned out to be almost a big nothing. And she sat there dismissively laughing at a New Zealand Herald journalist who said, well, with these vaccine passes, aren't you going to create two classes of citizens? It's famous, that clip. It's gone right around the world. It's viral. There was her cackling saying, yep, that is what it is. And what concerns me is that if they did that over health and they bring in two classes of citizens that are based on race or anything else, that they will just flippantly say that's okay, that we want to have that. And we've seen this in history. It never ends well. It never ends well. And that concerns me hugely more than anything. And one of the reasons why I've got this show, so that we can educate people by having guests like you on that are talking about these things without fear of being shouted down or silenced.
It's that whole thing of what happened over COVID. It was just another dark stain on New Zealand, really, when you look back, because, like everybody, we were all struggling to figure out what on earth this new disease was. And I can remember right at the beginning there were some New Zealand experts in the field who said, well, hang on a minute, it's an airborne disease. You're never going to be able to stop it coming into New Zealand. Therefore, lockdowns or any of those things, they're not going to work, except maybe in the short term, but you're not going to stop it. And what you actually need is a population that's got immunity, like, normally builds up in most societies. And so we watched as Sweden went down that path and most other countries, succumbed, or Western countries anyway, did the lockdown thing. And yet the voices of the people who were saying, hang on a minute, there's other ways of doing this, they were absolutely, like you say, silenced. And those brave doctors who tried to stand up and speak out and do things differently, they were, in some cases, deregistered. They were silenced as well. It was an appalling time. And Cam, I don't know whether you're old enough, but I grew up at a time where one of the books we read as kids at school was Anne Frank's diary.
Yeah, read that at school, yep.
Yep, and so we looked at what happened in Germany, and we learned all about the evil things that went on, the gas chambers, all that sort of thing. And I can remember Mum and Dad, of course, were in the war, and so were my grandparents, and I always had this burning question, which was, well, how did the people let Hitler get away with it? And you know what? When we went into that lockdown, I suddenly understood
Yeah.
why people would allow that sort of atrocity to happen, because it's done in the kindest way, right? You know,
Yeah.
we're just going to lock you up so that we'll keep you safe. And
It's like
so
they dusted off
done.
the manual. It's like they took the manual and they
right.
dusted. You know, and I, you know, I'm a keen student of history. I mean, you can't be involved in politics without knowing history, right? And I always had the same questions. How did this happen? How did the German people let this happen? How did the Jewish citizens of Germany allow this to happen? And it wasn't until 2014 when I was in Israel that I went to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum, which is brilliantly set up, where they walk you through the journey that German people went through that ended in the gas chambers, but it had to start somewhere. And it started with things like, we can't have you 100% owning this business. So we'll, you know, it was small steps all the way. And everyone went, oh, okay, well, that's not so bad. I can live with that. Oh, look, you can't use that swimming pool. You'll need to use that swimming pool. Oh, well, okay, at least I've still got a swimming pool to go to. And it went on and on like that until they were even selling them tickets for the trains, and they were buying tickets to take them to the camps. And it was all told to them as a great lie, but the German state actually charged them for it as well. And it wasn't until I walked through that museum that I understood. And then when it started happening in New Zealand with the lockdowns, the mandates, the vaccine passes, the vilification, the polarization, the hostility that existed in our society, where it was not only politicians but media that were doing it as well, that I realized we are just a few small steps away from totalitarian control here. And that is why I must oppose it utterly.
It was really scary because you suddenly, when you started to understand at a deeper level what was going on and how all of our rights and freedoms were suddenly taken away over a 3-day period, you know, in 3 days we're going to go into a total lockdown for a month. And you think, what?
Well, they denied,
you know, make sure you've got your baked beans and toilet paper.
But, you know, 2 days before they made that announcement, Jacinda Ardern was interviewed at a stand-up, and she was saying, it's a rumor, it's not true. If you haven't heard it from us, it's false, it's misinformation. She stood there, and I've got that video. She stood there saying it was all not true. You know, we're not going to do this. And 2 days later, there she was on our television with Michael Joseph Savage looming over his shoulder and talking to us all like we were naughty children and that we were going into a lockdown, and healthy people were being locked up in their houses. They said, do not speak to your neighbors, do not speak to other people, do not do this, do not. But they lied about it right from the get-go, and they've been lying ever since. And I guess that's why all of a sudden their vote has collapsed, because people are focusing on the election and they're saying, well, you know, you did all those things to us. You wrecked my business. You ruined my family. You split up my marriage. You've injured some people I know. Some people I know have got strange cancers and have died. I'm not having any more of this. And so we're seeing the evisceration of the Labour Party after 6 years of totalitarian control.
And I think that's a warning really to politicians that eventually the people do find their voice and they do have the strength to fight back. It's taken a while. You know, the 2020 election, I remember thinking to myself, gosh, this is a really good example of the Stockholm syndrome,
yep.
where, you know, people who were essentially held captor all of a sudden started treating the captor as the hero. And that was a most peculiar election, you have to say. And then, of course, there was all that strategic voting where people didn't think National would make it, so they voted for the Greens to keep them out, and, you know, or Labour rather, to keep the Greens out. And so it was a most odd election.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So with the state of the polls now, what's your prediction? What are you seeing is happening now with the polls all aligning, Labor being eviscerated. Are we going to see a change of government? And how do you think that's going to play out for some of the, I think there's 14 minor parties now that are well underneath the 5% threshold. And how is it going to play out for them?
I think, first of all, anybody who ever watched Peter Dunne and the Worm on TV, if you remember,
2002,
he went from being a party that was going to have one member to being a party that had 8 members of Parliament.
Yeah.
And so there, in politics, as we all know, unexpected things can happen. So number one, you can never rule out something unexpected that none of us have ever thought about coming in and changing everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. But barring that, and that only happens once in a blue moon, I think that the tide is definitely out for Labor. And as you mentioned earlier, their vote seems to be going all over the place, but I remember after the 2020 election, the analysis that was done essentially showed there was about 400,000 former National voters who'd all gone to Labor. Yep. And I think what's happening now is that they're all going back home. And some of them have gone to ACT, but I think the problem is ACT is starting to get a bit big for its boots and say things about things that, you should wait until after the election to make decisions about coalitions and holding the major party, trying to threaten the major party and all that sort of thing. I think David is out of place raising all those matters now. And so I think ACT's vote is consolidating. And the big question, of course, is whether Winston will get over the line. And, he's saying a lot of things that a lot of people want to hear.
Yep.
And whether or not, they can forget, what happened in 2017, I don't know. So he's an unknown. In terms of the minor parties, I think that a lot of people are very supportive of their minor party, but it goes back to what we said at the beginning. I think they have to wait and see how it plays out. There is always a chance that a minor party might make it, but that means them getting 4% or more. I think under 4%, I don't think there's any show. But if they're seen to be getting close, then other people might support them. But if they're not seen to be getting close, usually what happens is the vote collapses because people decide they're going to make their vote count. And so I think that we are on track. If nothing unexpected happens, I think we are on track for a change in government. It will be a national-led government. ACT will certainly be there. And the question is whether New Zealand First will be part of the mix. I don't know. I tell you what I find quite disturbing, and that is that the so-called coalition of chaos, the Labour, the Greens and the Maori Party, are getting so little scrutiny, by the mainstream media. When you look at the radical nature of the Greens, and as we've already talked about the radical nature of the Maori Party, but the Greens are shocking, and yet, they're treated with kid gloves, and I think it's about time they got some scrutiny.
What about the hypothesis that Matthew Hooton has come out with, which followed what I said on the political panel on Paul's breakfast show last Friday, when I can see a possibility that Christopher Luxon would rather go and do a deal with the Green Party so that he doesn't have a stroppy and demanding ACT party giving him a whole lot of grief, and then supported with New Zealand First to ensure that they've got confidence in supply. And I think that's a scenario that's possible with Christopher Luxon as leader. What are your thoughts on that? It fills me with dread.
That would be hugely bad for New Zealand.
Yeah.
if the Green Party was given proper power. I think it would just be dreadful. And I think that National Party supporters should make sure that their leader knows that, under no circumstances should National do a deal with the Greens. I know they did a sort of a support deal, didn't they?
Yes.
Back in John Key's day. But I think it was more lip service.
Yep.
And to be fair, those sorts of agreements where, you can decide to agree on certain things which are going to be for the good of the country, that's not a bad thing, to be honest, because it's bringing more groups, isn't it, inside the tent, so to speak, and that's what democracy is all about, trying to involve the public. But I think where you've got a party with really radical views having their hands on the levers of power, I think the last 3 years in particular should show New Zealand that is not what this country needs at the moment. What we need is strong, stable, middle-of-the-road government that is going to put right all the things that were put wrong over the last 6 years.
Well, that's right. I mean, you're absolutely right. We need to have a strong hand on the tiller, so to speak, so that crazy stuff doesn't happen, because it's crazy stuff that's happened for the last 6 years, just utterly crazy. And nobody's said, well, no,
it's minority rule, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
It's minority rule. That's the problem. And so what we need is majority rule. And so, all these crazy things that have been going on that, 1 or 2 or 3% of the population have been lobbying for, they shouldn't actually see the light of day in the way that they have. Sure, you have to listen to those voices, and maybe you can make changes, incremental changes, but not in the way that, they've been able to grab hold of power and change things for the detriment of the country.
Well, it's the very same thing that people who criticise Winston Peters say. They say it's the tail wagging the dog. But the system's kind of set up like that, where they need these smaller parties to get the majority in Parliament. And so the tail does end up wagging the dog, but very often not in the right proportions that reflect the vote. So strangely, New Zealanders have had 2 goes at this and selected MMP both times. But I think the politicians gerrymandered those referendums so that we could split the vote 3 different ways apart from the MMP, and that's what we ended up with.
That's right. I don't think that was...
Yeah, I think that's the biggest tragedy in New Zealand politics ever, is the selection of MMP, because we so much hated first past the post.
It was interesting because for a while there, I think people thought, oh, God, MMP is so bad, we need to get first past the post back. But the problem is, effectively, that's what we've had for the last 3 years. And that's been so bad that, you sort of think to yourself, gosh, well, MMP, when you've got more than one party governing, at least it doesn't seem to get to be as bad as it has. So, yeah.
Well, we end up with my feeling is we end up with what I call brown bread politics, which is, you might think it's a good idea until you taste it, and it's very unappetizing, and we actually don't get things done. And so for 30 years, we've been mired in this brown bread politics where everyone's too afraid to do bold things. And the bold things that they do try are things that don't matter to society, like changing the flag or some of the other things that have been done on the periphery. But the fundamentals don't seem to change because it's all too scary and we can't do the bold things. Like you'd never have a Roger Douglas rise up under MMP. It just wouldn't happen. You'll never have a Rob Muldoon again. You'll never get a Norm Kirk doing bold things. You're just not going to get those things under MMP, and I think we're poorer for it as a result. But then when you look at the lack of political intelligence or understanding of the systems, you hear people say, oh, if only we had STV. Well, if people can't grasp the concept of MMP, how the hell are they ever going to grasp the concept of a single transferable vote? That would just be a nightmare. Imagine the chaos from that. So
That's right.
we're stuck with a bad system. We need to I always say to people, vote, just vote, right? Choose who you want and vote for it, but be aware of the consequences or the effects of where you place that vote. And that's where we started this program, right at the start, when we're talking about the wasted vote, and that you can end up having the effect of giving away seats to parties you don't like because you voted for a party that didn't make that threshold. And David Farrar said exactly the same thing. He said, if you're not at 4% at this stage of the election campaign, you're not in the campaign. And people need to remember that.
You're exactly right. And, people just have to calm down before they think about voting because, you've been involved in enough political campaigns to know how, much adrenaline is going and how excited you get about everything.
Yeah.
But you actually do have to calm down and you have to think logically about where do you make your vote count. That's the important thing.
And I think that's a really good place for us to leave this interview, Muriel. Think about how you're going to vote and make it count. And I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me, and hopefully our listeners can learn from that discussion.
Thank you very much, Cam. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you, Muriel. Muriel is an intellectual powerhouse in politics, and it's a shame she didn't remain as an MP. But her observations of where we are now in history are as alarming as they are a warning that we all need to lift our game. Tell me your thoughts on what Muriel had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Now I have some exciting news to share with you. We have our RCR app in testing, and it will shortly be able to download from the app stores, both iOS and Android. Thank you all for being so patient while we've been working hard behind the scenes. I've been having a wee play on the test version, and I just know you're going to love it. Our video guy, Henry, has put together a little video to show you all what's in store. You can check that out at www.realitycheck.radio/app. That's at realitycheck.radio/app.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Gilda Kirkpatrick is an Iranian-born New Zealand author, creative director, and television personality. She starred as a main housewife on The Real Housewives of Auckland, which aired on Bravo. She was also the first contestant to be eliminated from Dancing with the Stars in 2018. She also wrote 2 educational series of sci-fi comic books called Asterons. But more recently, she's entered the fray on Twitter and other social media and amassed thousands of followers. Let's hear what she has to say about her journey and the state of play in politics today. Welcome to The Crunch.
Thank you, Cam. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and we've had a couple of private messages backwards and forwards on various issues, and then I saw the spy article that Ricardo did in the Herald. And there was a couple of things that were mentioned in there, and I thought, I need to get Gilda on my show. Because I think that the Herald only sort of kind of touched on some of the aspects there. They were more focused on your soirees, as they described them, with the various politicians. So, I just wanted to get you on the show so we can talk a little bit about your background, how you found the freedom movement, and now why you're getting involved actively in politics.
Well, to be fair, I've been here for 33 years, and throughout the years, I've always kind of been involved, whether it's been going to the fundraisings or actually knowing the politicians, meeting them in social settings, or following their policy just out of my own interest. So I kind of 27 years, I think, or something like that, I've been involved. And then while I was studying, I also, as a student, when you're, at uni, you kind of get involved anyway, because it is just what, younger people do. So I've never been that far. However, I think in the media, the focus has been more on my social life and, going to charities and things like that, rather than the actual political involvement.
So you came here 33 years ago. That's 1990, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that's after the revolution in Iran.
Yes, that's after the war.
Yeah. So you want to talk a little bit about that? What prompted you to come to New Zealand? What prompted your family to come to New Zealand? And what drove that?
Well, actually, I came here with my sister. And at the time she was, before we came to New Zealand, she was overseas and studying physics engineering. And then at that point I was 16 and my high school kind of was done, and we were like looking for somewhere to go and study. And obviously, the first place comes in mind are countries that you already speak their language, and New Zealand was English, so we don't have to go and study for 2 years in order to, understand what's going on or go and study. So we came to New Zealand, and at the time it wasn't that hard to come in. It was a very safe country for two girls without our family, without my mom and dad, to migrate here. And we've been here since. We both studied here and got our degrees, and we've always worked very hard, and we have married local people and have children. So we kind of lived most of our adult lives in New Zealand.
Yeah. But it must have been a bit of a shock coming from a post-revolution Iran to New Zealand.
Well, of course, especially, having witnessed the revolution, how things changes literally overnight, and then going straight into a bloody war for 8 years. It kind of, as a child, you can't help but, it just sinks into your psyche. You can't help but notice, how politics works, geopolitics works, how, the relation between different countries affects their people and their financial situation, or, how the wars come about. It's very earlier on, you kind of become very switched on about what goes on, and you start living in a reality that's a bit different to what a child is supposed to usually understand. But then again, it becomes part of your life. And for example, me or my sister, we've never managed to separate, what goes on globally and politically from our everyday lives, because we know how it can affect and changes your life.
Because, the revolution and then the war afterwards had a huge impact on Iran in terms of taking away freedoms and those sorts of things. Has that coloured your thinking, particularly around what happened during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. They say once bitten, twice shy. Once you've gone through that sort of change and you've experienced it, how hopeless it is to have other people make all your decisions for you, and you're basically this zombie that has to go through these motions of living without having any choice. So it's kind of it worries you all the time, but even more so when you have children, more so when once you've left the country that you love and your own land and your family, and migrate somewhere else for a better life, for a life that you can have choices, that you can have a say, that you can vote and choose your future, or even participate. It might not happen that you go and vote, but at least you know that you can participate. You have that freedom. To me, especially now that I have 2 children here, it's extremely important. And to see that those freedoms and rights and all that kind of get jumbled away, and for the greater good, it concerns me, because I already know, and I lived under that situation where, it was about the Islamic world. It was about the expansion of Shia Islam. It was about, control over certain countries in the Middle East. It was about control of power. And then, they use that as an excuse, and they take your very basic freedom as a human being away. And as we saw during COVID, as human beings, we couldn't go and seek certain operations if we weren't vaccinated. We were locked in our own home. They would say, oh, you can't, drive to, an hour away. You can't do this, you can't do that, for the greater good. So although the difference is, there's a big difference, but as an outcome, it's exactly the same thing. It is not giving value to your freedom as a human being without any, right reasoning.
Do you think New Zealanders take their freedom for granted?
I think they did, but I think what happened with COVID woke a lot of people up. People who, usually minded their own business and really didn't have any interest in politics. People usually, if they live in a beautiful country and they have a good lifestyle, or generally they don't care about international politics. They believe in their politicians because they're like, oh, we voted for them. They're after our best interest. And something like COVID happens, and they wake up like, oh, hang on a minute. It actually doesn't work like that. And traditionally, maybe to a lesser extent, but as the world is becoming more of a one entity, the pressure that comes from for the greater good concept, implicated and sort of dictated to the government around the world as like an advisor. Oh, we are all moving towards this. But at the end of the day, it's not something that the people of New Zealand, for example, woke up one day and came to the conclusion that, hey, this is better for our society. It's somebody else with certain ideologies sitting somewhere and has influence over our politician that we voted in. And that kind of global thinking, to me, is like religious expansion, religious thinking. It derives from an ideology. Yeah. So that scares me. I don't like that. That's why I'm kind of, and I've noticed that after the COVID, a lot of Kiwis have woken up to it. People who had no idea about what goes on. They used to think, oh, UN goes to certain war zones and stops the war. They had extremely basic idea about the involvement of these international organizations and entities who are putting all these agendas out and rules out, which our politicians also participate in. People weren't aware of that, and luckily a lot of people have woken up. A lot are still very kind of hesitant to get their head around, the power of these organizations, and they don't want to accept it, and they think it's a conspiracy theory. But none of these organizations are shy about it. In fact, you can read everything that they are planning, and our government's involvement, our politicians' involvement on their website, their profiles are all there. There is nothing conspiracy about it. It's not a theory. It's a plan in action that's happening, and our politicians are involved. What is wrong with talking about it?
That's the thing, isn't it? They are very open about it. The WEF,
Absolutely.
For example, they say they boast about penetrating the cabinets and having politicians that they control and coming up with policies like what the agriculture policy that they implemented in Sri Lanka, for example, which destroyed the economy. They're doing this, and they're quite open about it. And if only people would wake up and see it. I guess it's the role of people like yourself with your following on Twitter, and our role here at Reality Check Radio is to educate people that there are some people out there that are not politicians, that aren't elected, that want to control everything, from money to the way that you interact, to what you eat, to the way you behave.
And they're extremely open about it. Nobody's hiding it. This whole attitude that some people have at the moment you start talking about something bigger than, our own parliament, they get all like, oh my God, you're crazy. What are these things you're saying? And they really do not go and read for themselves. It takes half a day out of your life. Go and understand it. I don't have problem with certain policies that are putting out there because we are overpopulated, etc. But the way they're going about it is worrisome. It's very worrying for me, who's a mother of 2 children. And our politicians, somehow, they don't talk about it either. Their names are on their websites, their pictures on their websites, Our, Ministry of Health is taking direct orders from World Health Organization. So why not talk about it? Why the moment we open our mouth, we are ridiculed and pushed back by saying, oh, these conspiracy theorists are talking again. What is conspiracy about it? I have yet to see somebody come and explain to me why is this categorized under conspiracy theory or this word they use, anti-vaxxer. I mean, myself and my children, all my family, we've had every vaccination available for human beings all our lives. Even when you go travel to Africa or India, all this vaccination that you have to get. My children, have had everything. So myself, but one refusal for something that we were unsure about because it kind of came out a bit too quick and, we didn't even know really about the nature of this disease. And what we were hearing from these experts who got prizes all their lives, they've got doctorates and professors and they've written all these, medical journals. They were telling us that, hey, hang on a minute, it actually is this, and they were guiding people, but they were all like censored. And any question we raised was ridiculed. Why? Because a politician told you that it's a good thing. It turns out that it wasn't.
Yeah, it does turn out. Well, those of us who said no, we want to choose, and we're choosing no. They labelled us, they demonised us, they segregated us. They brought in a system where there was 2 classes of citizens in New Zealand. I mean, who would have ever thought that would have happened in New Zealand?
Yeah, it is just the things they did get away with. Still, I'm baffled. And it did happen overnight. And, I remember, all my friends and, people who knew me, they always used to ask me about the revolution in Iran, and what went from a country so advanced and so, civilized to all of a sudden women were like not even have no rights. And, how did that transition happen? And I would say it happened overnight. And people would think that I'm exaggerating. But when things happen based on ideology, under absolute power, we saw what happened here. Overnight, we were locked in our own homes with 1 case of COVID. The whole country went under lockdown. And when you think about it, I'm still healthy. My family are healthy. All my friends who didn't vaccinate are healthy. We don't get sick. Nothing happened to us. However, I have all these friends who are vaccinated and some people that I worked with. They are now saying that, oh my God, why am I getting so sick? Why am I continuously catching cold? And they're all trying to boost their immune system. But nobody talks about that. What about us? We were supposed to be dead by now. But they're not. So at the end of the day, any rational mind would look and say, okay, well, they have a point. Maybe. But no, people are just, some, not all, ignore it. They don't talk about it. They think if they ignore it, it will go away. It won't go away. It was the experience that we went through, and it was very public. It's part of our history now.
At what stage of the COVID mess did you decide, I've had enough, I'm going to go to Wellington? I mean, you live in a very nice house in one of the best suburbs in Auckland, and you saw some people there camping in Parliament. At what stage did you say, that's it, I have to go down there, I have to be there?
It was in the first couple of, I think I was there on day 3. And I watched the coverage of the media and how the presenters were ridiculing people, and how, on social media, people were attacking people, saying anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theory, foil heads. really disrespectfully. They were talking to this group of people that actually had enough, rational thinking and sort of research to go there and say, and they had enough respect for their autonomy and their human rights to go and, leave their homes, stay in their cars, go in the middle of cold to live in a tent by the parliament. And I saw these people getting ridiculed, and, I thought I can, as a citizen of New Zealand and somebody who's the mother of 2 children in this country, I can ignore my fellow citizens. I will go and help if that's going to give it a more balanced coverage, because they were saying, well, these people are filthy and are smelly and are this and fringe of the society. And for years and years, as you know yourself, I've been in the media, and everybody, and I kind of know basically all the people who are of this society, and I've been, friends with a lot of politicians and for years, so they can stick that label to me. I'm not a fringe, some, smelly, God knows who, that they labeled these people. So I went there, and I think it was the first time that I actually, so I had a phone call from some of my friends who are in yachting, and they said, well, are you going? We'll go. And I was like, okay. So we went, and I think Jason Harrison, he said that he was coming. And all of a sudden, the first, kind of normal article came out on the sports section, I think of Herald it was, that said that I was going and so was going and so and so. And then once I was there, Heather Duplessis Allen gave me an interview on the radio. And so I kind of felt that, and people were making fun, oh, is Gilda gone there? Has she got a box? Has she got a limousine? Has she got this and that? That's fine. You can talk about it and have fun on my expense. But at the end of the day, I felt that I gave it a little bit of an exposure and took away that sort of taboo that was attached. And people were like, I had a whole bunch of people from Auckland who are very well connected, super wealthy, super well educated. They all came down after I went there. They didn't stay for the whole 3 weeks, but they came for 2 days, 3 days, 1 day, at least they showed face. So, and I think the treatment of people during that time in Wellington, it was despicable. And, I would hate to see that again happening.
Yeah, I was watching, live streaming. I was watching Chantel Baker and other people live streaming. And I was getting angrier and angrier and angrier that our media were working hand in glove, lockstep with the government. They were standing up there beside the politicians in Parliament buildings and not going and talking to the protesters. I mean, every other protest that's there, whether it's Greenpeace or school kids, doing whatever, the politicians come out and talk to them. And they willing to meet with them, they cover them, they get a spokesperson on the television, they do all of those sorts of things. And what we saw here was an unwillingness of the media and the politicians in the parliament to go and talk to some people who had genuine grievances. And it angered me. And so, actually one of your neighbours is a mate of mine, and he said, well, I've got a plane, let's go down to Wellington. And so we all piled into his plane, and we had another guy with a plane. There's a whole lot of us. We flew down to Wellington. A friend picked us up at Parapram Airport and drove us to the protest. And, we stayed there for 3 days. And what I found when I got there is that it was nothing like the media had claimed. There wasn't filthy, dirty people. People were, organised. There wasn't any rubbish. People were being nice to each other. It wasn't a rowdy, horrible protest with lots of, white supremacists and angry, violent people. It was ordinary Kiwis who were frustrated.
I mean, you saw it yourself. It was the most diverse community. There were some extremely sort of kind people who were donating. Like, I could help just by sort of getting some fuel, for the just basic things. But they were actually cooking and, had shifts, making coffee all day, making different type of food. It was amazing. People were bringing organic stuff from their farms, donating. And there were of all walks of life and race in that community. And a lot of those people actually were traditionally voters for Labour and to see, or the Greens. And for them, it was such a disappointing sort of wake up to reality call. And, it didn't help that politicians like Michael Wood, who are getting handsomely paid while everybody else has to shut their businesses and get kicked out of their, jobs, etc. For him, his paycheck was still coming in to go and take the mic in the parliament and call this very diverse group of voters and taxpayers to call us, a river of filth. River of filth. I mean, like, who with an ounce of respect for human beings and human dignity would come out and say such thing as I might go and call a group of people idiots or whatever, but as a somebody who is in the parliament that people have voted and are paying for your wages, you're not a private citizen, to go and stand there and call these people. You can see with your own eyes, they're just ordinary people like me. Why are you calling us, river of filth? What kind of a language? And then Mr. Mallard, with saturating people, there were children amongst those people, the police's brutality. It was, I saw it with my own eyes. I wasn't watching somebody's feed. I wasn't looking at TV, hearing from reporters. I was there on the ground myself, and I was witnessing what was happening. Inexcusable, really. And, the most disappointing thing for me was that really no opposition came down there, except Peters, and I think Mike King came down, and Winston Peters. And then I think David Seymour kind of came. He didn't come inside, but he was down there talking to some, shop owners or cafe owners. Yeah. And he got attacked and by the media that how dare you go down there and talk to us. It's like, what is wrong with us? We don't have leprosy. We are, not contagious. We are a healthy group of people. We all pay taxes. We are, voters. What have we done for us to, be so judgmental about us? It was like I lost my respect a lot to a lot of media personalities, about a lot of journalists that were twisting the facts and truth, and the manipulation that I saw myself, and I worked it out, and at the time I put it online that they were manipulating Twitter, a lot of bot accounts so it was very ugly. I'm glad that it's over, but at the same time I don't feel like it's been properly addressed by the oppositions or people in charge like Chris Hipkins and Ashley
Bloomfield,
Bloomfield.
So have you seen River of Freedom, the film that's just been released?
I haven't seen it yet.
Right.
I've seen parts of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing yet. I haven't managed to get myself there.
I went to the premiere, and it's a beautiful film, and it encapsulates the feeling that I felt when I was there. And it stands in stark contrast to the other documentaries that have been released, like the Stuff, Fire and Fury thing, which I didn't see any of what they were saying in Fire and Fury. All I saw was people that were hurting, that wanted to be heard, and the violence that was brought to the Parliament protest was brought by the police and not anybody else.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Has that scarred you to the point where you feel that you need to be engaged and get some of these politicians around to your house so that we can understand why they did certain things or to hold them to account? Because, you've had David Seymour at your house. You've had Winston Peters. You've had Simon O'Connor. Winston Peters obviously wasn't one of those who refused to talk. He was one who did. Tell us about those meetings you've had at your house and what you've discovered by having them there.
Well, I had Matt Kings too, very earlier on in the year. I I just feel like a lot of people that I have around and people that I know, they are showing interest. They want to know. Unfortunately, their trust in media is gone. And what media shows, the interviews with the politicians, it really, you don't really hear the questions you want. You know, it's all like baiting each other, answering each other. You know, the interviewer is fighting with the. So it's not very. It's kind of like got you.
Journalism, yeah, got you.
Yeah,
Journalism, yeah.
Yeah, it's a sensational got you journalism that gives them some headline that will get some clicks, etc. So each time I invited about 150 to 170 people, and from all walks of life. I mean. They aren't like people think, oh, by association, Gilda's friends are all very privileged and wealthy. Absolutely. I'm one of those people that, you know, I have friends who are beneficiaries. I've got a very big variety of friends because I don't really care, you know, what am I going to get, you know, from my wealthy friends, for example. It's more of a character of a person that I'm attracted to, or a person that I can conversations with and, you know, about meaningful things rather than just stupid, superficial stuff. So they were the people that were more confused on these oppositions. I mean, we've had Labour and Green at the helm, so they don't really need a coverage from my perspective. They've had every opportunity out there. But, you know, it is very different when you meet a politician in person and you ask your concern and question and you get to watch how they answer it. If they are like sort of like trying to weave out of your question, answering like a politician, or they are answering it like a human being who has concern rationally and, you know, with respect to you and your question without trying to, you know, discount it. And a lot of these people, they employ very many people, you know, they are teachers, they are involved with a whole bunch of other people. And I think for them, it was interesting, but they are from migrant communities, you know, from India, from China. So for them, I think it was really sort of a great opportunity to attend to and voice their concerns. I wasn't promoting any of these politicians.
No, you're just facilitating a discussion.
Absolutely, because it is crucial to not go and be lazy and just vote because you've traditionally done so or because you've seen something on the media. No, go and answer yourself and figure out and have a meet and greet and get to know this person or character, see how they are responding to you. Are they respecting you? Are they just treating you like a, you know, idiot? You know, all my guests, they really appreciate it. And there were different groups of people, some kind of cross, but mostly different. And I think it was very important for them. And it was really good to see politicians not standing on a podium, just talk and say whatever they want, that they practiced. It was good to not see politicians being hassled for, you know, got you moment by journalists. It was very genuine, one-on-one, concerned citizen talking to their politicians who are, you know, wanting their vote. I think it worked. It was for both. You know, it was great. And a lot of people came back and gave me feedback on what they thought or, you know, how they perceived it. And it helped people to be more informed. And when they're going to vote informed. If they didn't like this certain group of people that came and talked in my house, you know, the opposition right party, for example, center right, then if you're voting Labour, then vote informed, knowing who you're voting for.
Absolutely. And so what was the impression you got? Let's just go through them. You've had Matt King. What was your impression of Matt King and how he engaged with the people at your house?
I really like Matt. I think he was being very genuine. He was being honest. He was down at the protest. Yeah. I feel like he's one of those guys who's not afraid to, you know, talk about his opinions, and he's not playing a political game. You know, he's not playing political games. So I liked that it was genuine. He had a lot of good stuff to talk about in regards to the farmers and, you know, the rural New Zealand. It was really good. Then we had David, who
David Seymour, yep.
Yes, David Seymour from ACT, who's an old friend of mine. Really good. He talked more about the co-governance, and and people had different questions for him. Some he was comfortable to answer, some he didn't want to answer or address. Really, he was not too comfortable to get involved with certain questions. Winston Peters was very frank. He came very well prepared and well, sort of. We had some people in the crowd who are voters of Green or say Labour, and they were asking some hard questions, and he had all facts and figure in a file he brought with him, so he was very well prepared. And I think people liked how frank he was. Now there are people who say, oh, that's his job, and he's been in politics for a long time and he knows what to say. Correct, but I listened to him and I had my questions, people had their questions, and I didn't find anything to doubt him even for a second. But that's my right as a person. Maybe you don't like his policies or the way he's approaching things. And then we had Simon O'Connor, who was amazing. He came with 5 of the candidates for national in different area, like Mangere, like different areas. There were amazing women, extremely inspiring. One of them had 5 kids, had 3 degrees, came from a migrant family. 11 of them slept in the same room, house. They all had very amazing, genuine, interesting stories. We had a lovely lady, she was Mari, and she was wonderful. Like, her journey also was inspiring. Really good group of, one lady was Chinese, and all of them had these amazing stories of struggle and extremely high achievers. All kind of had children except one. She was the youngest. And it was really good to see a different side of National rather than just seeing, say, Chris Luxon on TV and, New Zealand and Chris Luxon this and Chris Luxon that. It was good to see, okay, who are these people behind National also? Very diverse, really cool. And Simon himself is very frank. I did some activities and attended to some protests for, freedom and human rights for women and generally in Iran. And he was kind enough to help the Iranian community and actually attend these protests. So he's a lovely person, and his view also is very humane and rational about what happened during the COVID time and the vaccines, etc. And yeah, really heartwarming. The questions he answered very honestly and thoroughly. He didn't sound like a politician. He sounded like a very caring human being. Yeah, so I guess, but other people who were there may not agree with me on certain things, and that's fine, as long as right. As long as you make your decision informed. That's all we want. We can't dictate our thoughts and ideology to other people. We can make them aware, but that's all we can do.
It's interesting too that the things you've just said about Simon O'Connor, because the ACT Party is standing Brooke Van Velden in the electorate against Simon O'Connor. It's your electorate. Yeah. He's your MP.
Yeah.
And the ACT Party and the media have painted Simon O'Connor as some sort of religious weirdo who's anti-women. But your comments suggest that he's got a deeper kind of compassion and will stand up for rights and freedoms, particularly for women, which is in complete opposite of what A, the ACT Party is saying, and B, what the media are saying.
Again, that's why in the first place I had these gatherings, because what comes out of media or on the platforms of, this politician who go on TV or whatever, it's not necessarily what you experience in reality with these candidates and these people. And Simon is a great example. I don't know any other politician, male, who's been more active on helping us in our journey towards bringing awareness and getting some help for Iranian women in Iran. He's been extremely supportive. He's showed up, he's put his time, very, very respectful. I've never, ever experienced anything from him to, give me that impression that he's not otherwise, or he's got anything against women. And all the candidates that he came with, they were all women, and they had a lot of respect for him. So yeah.
It's an interesting observation because, that's the problem we've got in New Zealand society, is that people inform themselves through the lens of the media. And we've seen during COVID just how shameless the media are at actually following the government line or an agreed narrative. And that's the narrative they've built about Simon O'Connor. And yet here's a very personal view from someone who was in your house that's completely different from the narrative that the media have shown us. And it tells me that it's more important to actually bother to go and engage with politicians directly or via sort of meetings like this. And I mean, that's how I've been working in politics all my life, was I take people as I find them. And you develop a personal relationship with them by engaging in discussion, and you might not agree with them 100%, but you may find them to be different people to what they've been portrayed in the media. And I've found that. And now you're explaining that as well, which is great. It's fantastic to see. And I guess that's one of the benefits of your, what the media call soirees at Gilda's house.
Well, I know it sounded, a lot of people are like, what is this? Why are they calling you this? But at the end of the day, I think, again, it was like how they, in the sports section, they put down that we went down to Wellington for the protest. This was, I think, again, as a social article, but from that window, and I want to thank the editor for allowing the Q&A to be, they put it in the article as it was. And I was very grateful. And I was like, wow, that's although I talked about WEF and stuff like that, but I was amazed that Herald actually went ahead and put it in as it was. And, they didn't, I thought, discounting all the funny, little digs in the house price and stuff like that. I was grateful that I actually wrote or printed my words or put it out there, which was good. I think that's a little bit of a victory. It's a bit of a change.
Yeah, and some of those words, I mean, let's look at the quote, one of the ones that it's made me want to give you a call and get you on the show. You said that you wanted to see the maintenance of personal freedom of speech, autonomy and respect for human rights and equality, clear positioning of political parties on co-governance, and a comprehensive agenda on our education curriculum within schools.
Yes. I think these are...
Yeah, no, go ahead. That's quite a broad range of things, but the first thing that you said was personal freedom of speech and autonomy.
It is important, especially, Kiwis, again, they don't know how lucky they are. When you look at New Zealand, we are in an environment, we are in a type of country where we can actually approach our politicians. We can go to this gathering, we can invite them to our houses and have this one-on-one personal connection with them and address our concerns. But when you look at a country like Iran, or you look at Mexico, these big countries, politicians are surrounded by guards and nobody can go near them. They're never in, sort of smaller settings, they are just untouchables. But in New Zealand, it's not like that. And not to take advantage of this freedom and this opportunity that we have is really our loss if you don't, go hard and get there. At the end of the day, if you have a business, you want to employ people. If you go and meet them, you meet your, child's teacher, you meet people, we want to employ or give our lives to or trust, or, we meet them in person and get to know them. But why is it so different? These politicians are in charge of our lives. They are there to represent us. They are the public servants. we should be able to, not make a big deal of, oh my God, why do you invite them to your house? And like, that's ridiculous. So why? Why is it ridiculous? It is our right to practice it. We should take advantage of our freedom. Every single person in this country matters, regardless of their religion, their race, their background. Everybody's opinion and, power matters. If they can vote, they can make a decision for the rest of us. So, I really encourage people to be less shy about politicians and get involved with them a bit more personally.
I mean, that's what I've always done, and I was encouraged by that, not by my father being involved in politics, but by my mother. She would say to me, just talk to these people. And by talking to people, you can find common ground. And I think that's one of the things that's been lacking in New Zealand society for quite some time, with this polarization and, segregation and racism that's just very nasty. We've forgotten how to talk to people. And that's why freedom of speech is so important, because we've got these abilities to speak, and we should speak. And you've been doing that with the politicians by having them in your house. You engage with them on Twitter and other social media. But that's what more people need to be doing. We need to be actually talking with these politicians face to face, so that they will listen to us instead of telling us and giving us orders and telling us what to do. And doing things that, I think you used the term, basic human decency. And some of the things that have been done in the last, particularly the last 4 years, are completely against basic human decency.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that got me really, I was so disappointed and I was shocked by hearing it, was that I remember there was like a protest. It was a Black Lives Matter protest. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
We had one in Auckland, I think, and like around the same time there was this policy. I think it was a week after. I can't remember. That came out that if you get COVID or if you're unwell and you go to the hospital, if you're Maori or Pacific Islander, you automatically will go through the emergency faster. And I was like, wow. So you virtual signal and you say Black Lives Matter in midst of COVID, but Black lives don't matter if you're from Somalia. If you're from Ethiopia, that doesn't matter anymore, right? Because if your child is sick or your grandmother is sick and they go to hospital, they won't fall into the category of Pacific Island or Maori. So what kind of a virtue signaling is it? Does it matter or does it not matter? Which is it? Don't give that thing and then go and preach the other thing. Or, your actions and behavior should kind of go hand to hand with your words if you're politicians. But yeah, that was, especially as an immigrant, when I look sometimes, I just feel so disturbed by how, certain conversations continuously is revolving around race. Why? For years, we've educated our children, we've, educated our societies that race doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter, what country you are. We are all equal human beings. We all have rights as human beings. We're expected to be heard, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, the whole conversation is gone to race again. It's like paddling backward. Why pedaling backward? Why are we doing this? Which is disturbing, again, especially as sort of an immigrant who wasn't a colonizer. Why are you in the midst of this, getting overlooked?
The funny thing is, Gilda, is you call yourself an immigrant, but your beliefs about human rights and getting along with everybody and all, that's the way New Zealand used to be. And you're calling yourself an immigrant, but you're actually more Kiwi than most Kiwis are.
Yeah, but I think I do that by default, because every time I open my mouth, people say, like, especially online, go back to Iran, and, foreigners don't tell us what to do, etc. Although, like, some of those people probably weren't born when I came here, and I've always studied hard, I worked hard, paid my taxes, employed people, I've always done the right thing in my head as a responsible citizen. I've never ever infringed on, other people's rights. And people have this thing, oh, you married somebody rich and you're, you don't know anything about anything, and, what qualifies you, and you drive a nice car, which is ridiculous, because how is that a measure of anything?
No, it's just not.
I'm not putting any burden on you as a taxpayer, am I? No, I'm contributing. I'm helping the wheel of economy in this country. I'm employing people. If anything, you shouldn't be criticizing me. What have I taken away from other people? But we have charities. Why is none of that, in people's view, a good thing? But they criticize you for it. So what do you want me to do? Be, I don't know, a gang member? Would you respect me more?
I think they just want you to shut up. I think they just don't like your opinions, and it would be best if you just shut up. I mean, that's what happened to me. We've both gone through similar things, and if they don't like what you're saying and they can't challenge you with logic or rational thought or a cogent argument, then they just tell you to shut up. And it's unedifying, it's unpleasant. But people like yourself keep on speaking, because if you stop speaking, they win. So it's better to keep speaking.
Yeah, I'm not. It doesn't bother me, the comments, but it's interesting though when you think about it. Everything that I'm saying is because I care for my fellow citizens, and I care for this country, and the future of it. I have a lot of kind of wealthy friends who actually don't care. They're 6 months overseas, and they don't get involved. They're like, oh, whatever, let them be. But yeah, I can't do that, because to me, it is one of the most important, duties a human being can have, a decent human being can have. To care about the community and fellow citizens, regardless of religion and ideology. It's, our basic rights.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, basic human rights and decency. And for too long, our major political parties have not shown us that. And that's why we're seeing a rise of some of these smaller parties that are there, that are actually practicing what they preach. And this election, hopefully some of them will get into the parliament and we can have a bit of a change. I certainly think we're going to see a change of government, absolutely. But what that looks like is up to the voters. And that's where your comment earlier, when you said inform yourself, get yourself some knowledge about these politicians, choose someone that reflects your values or as close to your values as you can get, and make sure you vote. Because if you don't vote, you really have got no right to complain.
You're absolutely correct, and I hope and I wish that we see more people kind of stop looking at this as like a rugby game. It's this team versus that team. Oh, I'm in this team, I'm in that team. Or, like one of these programs on TV that people are so used to, the format of, voting for people. Because it's definitely not that. Everybody who's out there, whether they're Green Party voters or Labour, majority wants, they have good intentions somewhere.
We all want the same thing. It's just how we do it.
Yeah, but, step into reality and check it out and see exactly where these promises are made. Are they going to be deliverable? Are they going to stick by them? These politicians out there, have they promised certain things that they've already delivered? Look at this basic stuff. And then if you still choose whoever you want, then that's fine. But go and don't treat it like a sports team. Just because you traditionally have voted national, it doesn't mean you necessarily, you just go and tick the box. See what they're standing for, what they're telling you. Do you trust them? But yeah, I don't know. Hopefully people will make the right decisions and we'll have a better, diverse group of people in power who actually care about our individualities and our rights, and also about our country. We don't want what happened in Sri Lanka to happen here. I always say, we're a country of 5 million people in 2 isolated islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we are exporting meat, feeding, it's like the kitchen of the world almost. And then I go to Indonesia and I'm like 120 million people or whatever. India, the population is
over
in
a billion.
billions.
Yeah.
And not only, for example, India announces and says, hey, we are actually dropping our environmental measures and we are going to use more coal, right? And then what exactly are we doing as a 5 million people to put our farmers in jeopardy, put the economy of our country for an ideology with 5 million people across just 2 islands? We are not even collectively, we are not even one neighborhood in India or China or Indonesia or Iran. 85 million people in Iran. Tehran, the city I come from, it's got about 18 million people to 20 million transitory. It changes.
Yeah.
So, they're not making any measures. Why should we put people in our country who are feeding the world out of, their livelihood and inflict so much uncertainty and, worry and pain and poverty because our politicians want to jet off to Davos and be like, oh, good job, you listen to us. Well, why? I just don't see the, logic behind it. It doesn't make sense, however you look at it, for the interest of people in New Zealand. I think look after our people and interest of our people first. When you're in a position where, there is no poverty, we don't have homeless, the children are taken care of, families have jobs, we don't have our youth going and using drugs and ram raiding. Once we fix that, then let's talk about the global issues. Not right now. We can't even fix our own society and we're worried about the global issues. I don't understand it.
Yeah, we can't fix up. If we can't fix potholes, how can we fix global issues?
Exactly. There you are.
Yeah. And I think that's probably about where we should leave this, on those positive notes about voting and freedoms and all that. And look, Gilda, I appreciate your time today. And I think that the Reality Check radio listeners will appreciate seeing a little bit about who the real Gilda Kirkpatrick is.
Hi, Cam. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and, giving me time to express my. Although what I'm saying is most people are aware about it. They know about it. However, some people are a bit shy. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about what their fellow, colleagues, etc., might think of them. But I think none of this is made up. Everything that I'm saying is actually in practice. It is happening right in front of our eyes. We've experienced it. The information is out there. All we need to do is people to just take a bit more responsibility and educate themselves and be informed, because this election, I think, is a game changer.
Yeah, game changer. It is very important, and 5 weeks to go and only 2 weeks to go till voting starts. So it's very important that people are involved and informed, and that's the reason why I have people like you on my show. So
thank you so much, Cam.
Thank you. What an amazing woman, coming from Iran and building a life in New Zealand. She has a world perspective about the importance of freedoms and cherishing and protecting those freedoms that only a person who has experienced totalitarianism for themselves has. Let's hope we hear more from Gilda. Don't forget to send comments on Gilda's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You've heard the words open, fair, both sides of the story. It's easy to say them, but practicing them often seems like a bridge too far. New Zealand, it's time for a reality check. RCR, Reality Check Radio. Rational discussion, common sense, and open debate for real. With me, Paul Brennan. You know, you just can't make this stuff up. You couldn't write the script. Veteran broadcaster Peter Williams.
Where is the evidence they actually make a difference? It turns out that was a very fair question to ask.
Taking on the mainstream, Chantel Baker.
Mainstream media, as usual, in their little perch.
The man who cares so much and whose background is for real, Rodney Hyde.
The doctors don't believe them. They can't get ACC. They can't work. They're told it's all in their head.
Along with a raft of contributors to inform, entertain, and bring the truth back to New Zealand media. It's time for a reality check, all right. RCR, Reality Check Radio at www.realitycheck.radio. We've arrived.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Now it's time for Cam's Buddies. And this week we have a controversial topic. Are Maori indigenous to New Zealand or not? I regularly catch up with these buddies of mine, and they always give me their unvarnished views on anything, even if they disagree with me. My producer has them all lined up and ready to go, so let's hear what Cam's buddies have to say about Winston Peters' claim that Maori are not indigenous and their reactions to the scolding he got as a result. Good afternoon, Paul. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Good afternoon, Cam.
So the question I've got for you today is, what did you think about Winston Peters saying that Maori are not indigenous?
I find that a very interesting statement to make because some while ago I watched a documentary, Skeletons in the Wardrobe or Skeletons in the Closet. I think Skeletons in the Wardrobe. And it was a documentary about our red-haired Maori. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, this is unbelievable stuff and they go on and talk quite a lot about how these people, some of them came from India, some of them came from Persia, and some of them came from the islands where they have got all those busts, the Easter Islands. Yep. And they talked about these different things and how they had talked of Maori in their ancestry being here for 165 generations. Another one talked about being here. There was rats in New Zealand, and rats came on ships. They weren't just in New Zealand, but they found dead rats that they carbon dated that were 2,000 years old. And for carbon dating on rats to be 2,000 years old, they came from somewhere, and both in the North and South Island. So someone was in New Zealand 2,000 years ago that came by a boat. And when you look at that and saying, well, hang on, we're saying the Maori people have been here for 800 years only, I'm thinking, well, that doesn't seem indigenous. Indigenous is the people that were here before or at the beginning. And so I think Peters has got a point there that these people, and when I was at school, there was a girl and her brother both had red hair, and they were both Maori. And I think Monica is one of the, I think the girl's name, there's a lady's name who's Monica, is a red-haired Maori from many, many generations back, but she was still alive when this documentary was being told, and she's got the ancestry of her people that go back way beyond 800 years.
It's fascinating.
Also, things like Fairy Springs. What was Fairy Springs named after?
Yeah, fairies.
A New Zealand European name, or was it after the fairy people that have got they were very small people with blonde hair? And the red-headed Maori, they also had green eyes and blue eyes. And these are recessive genes, I know, But for those folk to still be here, they've come from further back than just the last 800 years. So the government and the libraries and the history of New Zealand know this to be facts, but somehow, for some reason, they think it's good to change the history of New Zealand. And I don't understand why they would do that. There's something at stake, and whenever there's something at stake, it always boils down to money.
Totally. So what do you think then about what Christopher Luxon has said about what Winston Peters has said? And I'll just quote what he said. He says that Peters is clearly wrong. And he said, as I've said to you, I'm not worried about Winston Peters. He's not in Parliament. He's below the thresholds.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say. I wouldn't rush at saying Winston Peters is wrong on too many things. And the reason I wouldn't is because often he says things that you think, well, that's ridiculous. And later it turns out to be true. And you think, okay, people have said all sorts of things around it and misled you, but often Winston has come with what's true. And you think, well, and I haven't been a Winston follower or supporter. I've never voted for him. But what I have done is listen to him. He's like an old general, really. But he knows a lot of stuff. He's very wise. And I think Christopher Luxon, to say that he's one, below the threshold, and two, what he's saying is not true, I would be very careful saying that, because there's many historic records that prove what Winston is saying has some truth in it. Now, why is he saying it? I think that when anyone says things that are true, I always think, well, it's pretty good. And then when someone else says, well, I think it's wrong, I think Christopher Luxon might be being a bit woke rather than, or he hasn't looked into it, so he could be being ignorant. But either way, it doesn't sit well with me, because I quite like the truth. When someone tells you something and you think, well, that's on a bit of a tangent, and then you look it up and it turns out to be true, then they get some good cred in my world.
And then what about David Seymour, who's described it as ugly politics? They're desperate. The truth is most polls still have them under 5%. His political career is over, and he's got nothing to show for 45 years of this. You're a pensioner, aren't you, Paul? You've got a gold card.
Well, I was going to say nothing to show. I've got a gold card, but I've also got a gold AT card. And so I catch the ferry into town from time to time, and I catch, I know that I've got a pension, and I think there's some things there that that Winston's done that we all try to say, oh, that's nothing, but many old people believe that their rights and their dignity have been kept intact because of some of the money that Winston has enabled them to get in their old age.
So David Seymour was...
They might find...
No, so you're saying David Seymour's wrong about that too, and he's the one that's playing the ugly politics, or?
Well, David Seymour's a wise man. I think he might be even too wise, because he's more wise than likable. But I think he's either making a mistake, or he's thinking it's good to say, like, to dismiss someone. But many of the people that will vote for Winston, I believe, are going to vote for Winston instead of ACT, because they might not want to vote National. They would vote for ACT, except for ACT was talking about how much she wanted to vaccinate everybody with some degree of fervour. And so I think that they're looking places to go, and I think he would be unwise to underestimate Winston, because Winston's a wily old fox, and he might do better than you would think. And the fact that he's mentioning this particular thing, which I've believed to be true for some years since I watched the documentary, I'm thinking, well, that's interesting that he's... And who can say it better than a Maori?
Exactly. That's the thing. But the funny thing is that Winston has been saying this for decades and decades, and now, in the middle of our woke political environment, it's terrible that he's saying it, even though he's been saying it for decades.
Well, he's saying his personal ancestry, is my belief, is from China. And so he's from the Maori group that came from China or Taiwan. I'm not sure. I know he was definitely saying there's, I think, some indigenous people in China that are same heritage as him, and he's gone up there, met them, and talked to them. Well, this isn't a figment of his imagination. This seems pretty real. Now, if people can't cope with the truth and they want to change the history of New Zealand so that everybody believes the lie, who's really in the wrong now?
Well, that's right. And I think it's, the media and the politicians that have dismissed this statement, I think they're wrong. And I think that Winston Peters will probably get a bump in the polls because he's speaking the truth. But I guess we'll have to wait 5 weeks to see if it sticks and increases his vote.
Well, sometimes I think the polls, even if he was at 4% today, which I don't believe he is, I think he's more like 8%, but if he was at 4% today, he goes up in the election, not down, and some of the major parties go down, not up. So it might be that even if he was at 4, he'd get over the 5, and if he's at 8, where I think he could be, because many people that I talk to that have never been inclined to vote for him are voting for him. And I'm thinking, I might even think about it myself, but I'm looking and thinking, I've never voted New Zealand First in the past, but I look again and I'm thinking he's doing better than I would have imagined, because people like his truth. People like the fact that he was prepared to change when he realised he was wrong on the vaccine mandate, for example, and he listened to what the people said and then decided to change. Now, it seems like I'm going on about the vaccine mandate, and as opposed to what your question was, but the man doesn't seem to mind the truth, whereas many politicians don't like it.
Well, they seem to be allergic to it, don't they? Anyway, I think that's covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about, and so we will have to go on to the next caller. Thank you very much, Paul, for participating in Cam's Buddies.
Thanks, Cam. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye. G'day, Miles. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you this afternoon?
Box of birds, as always. Now, the question I've got for the buddies this afternoon is, what do you think about Winston Peters' statement that Maori are not indigenous to New Zealand?
Well, on the face of it, it's a very interesting statement. I mean, Winston has, in fact, had the courage to open up a debate on the whole indigenous area. And I think that this is important in two aspects. One is, if you think about the oral history of the Maori, they arrived in 7 canoes. I believe Tainui, Te Arawa, Matatua, Kurahaupo, Tokomaru, Aotea and Takatimu. Now, the interesting thing is, in 1850, 4 ships arrived in Christchurch: the Randolph, the Cressy, the Sir George Seymour and the Charlotte Jane. Now, in my mind, what's the difference if you step off a waka or if you step off a sailing ship? When is indigenous? How long do you have to be here?
Well, it's a good point. But the official description of indigenous is people who have lived in a place for thousands of years. Of course, the United Nations has a more woke type of answer to that. Allows them to self-select and say that they're indigenous. But the reality is that Aboriginals have lived in Australia for tens of thousands of years. And, if they're using the United Nations definition of indigenous, well, then the Vikings who invaded the north of England instantly became indigenous because they were still there 500 years later.
And this is the really interesting area that Winston has opened up debate on. And good on him for having the courage to open up debate in this most woke times, and that is the definitions of indigenous. Now, in the age of the internet, you can change the definition on an internet page in a second, as you've alluded to. However, when you had to print dictionaries, indigenous was Indigenous. And I think this debate that Winston's opening up is, why does Indigenous actually matter? And the problem that I have is that I'm not worried whether people are Indigenous or not. But if being Indigenous entitles you to special rights, special privileges, or being treated differently, then the definition of Indigenous really does matter to me. I mean, let's look at our hospital system.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm a recent user of the hospital system. Now, in my view, here's a really good example of equality of treatment for all. Now, health has always been treatment according to need. The triage was always the worst cases first. But now we're seeing specific instructions to the hospital for treatments according to race. Now, if you remember back to the 80s, New Zealanders were on the streets protesting against treatment according to race. How is it that in these times we are sitting quietly accepting what's being forced on us by a few, and I do mean a few, woke elites?
What about
I think that
the comments that have been made by Christopher Luxon and David Seymour that this is ugly politics, and in the case of Christopher Luxon, saying that Winston Peters is wrong?
Those comments are weak, and I'm afraid that we need to have robust discussions without fear or favour. And I don't care whether it's about Indigenous. I don't care whether it's about the right to health care. I want to be able to have a robust discussion where people can share ideas, and to try and shut it down like Christopher Luxon does with his statement is just simply weak and wrong. And I feel very strongly that we as the whole of New Zealand should be having this debate. We are not a country that accepts people being treated differently for one reason or another. And, now we have had a system railroaded on us, and health is the best example of that. And I'm not happy.
So, when Christopher Luxon says that Winston Peters is wrong, is he saying that he knows better than the DNA tale that exists out there?
Yeah, whether he knows better or not is a moot point. But surely Christopher Luxon should be using the courage of Winston Peters to open up this area for robust debate. This area concerns all New Zealanders. And I think a very large majority of people are really sick and tired of being told that they're right or they're wrong, and having their opinions and thoughts shut down by someone who is an imagined role of power. Why do we expect that?
Well, I don't know why we expect that, but, there's science that backs this. There's, actually anthropological markers in terms of facial tattoos, skills, carvings, those sort of things. And then there's the DNA markers that exist that says that Maori came here from somewhere else. And it may well, in fact, be a case that Maori were amongst the first colonisers rather than being Indigenous.
And if we look what happened to the Moriori, maybe that's what happened to the other inhabitants of New Zealand. We don't know. We weren't there. The Maori have a strong oral history, and they tell us that they, in fact, were a seafaring people who landed on the coast in 7 canoes. If that's not arriving on a country and then imprinting their culture on it, if that's not colonisation, I don't know what is.
Well, exactly. So you think Winston's right, Seymour and Luxon are wrong, and we should have more truth bombs coming from Winston Peters.
Well, we definitely should have debate in this area. This is a really important area that all New Zealanders need to be talking about and making a decision on their own grounds on the basis of equality and what they consider fair and equitable. And, you know, Winston's right in opening it up. And I'm sorry, Luxon and Seymour are wrong for shutting it down.
And the media as well, because this is a position that Winston Peters has held for decades. And it's amazing that the media have jumped on this like it's a new revelation. Winston's been saying this exact thing. I can remember, you know, several times him saying that Maori came from China or Taiwan. And he said he's been up there and visited some of the tribes people from Taiwan and, you know, met them and bothered to go. Now, how many other politicians have bothered to do that? I would suggest it'd be zero.
And how many other politicians are quaking in fear lest they say something wrong so that they get pilloried by the vocal minority? I mean, come on, guys. You're representing all New Zealanders without fear or favour, not just a minority, a small minority. And let's be fair. That small minority has an oral tradition arriving in sailing Waka, just the same as the Christchurch have the same oral history and written history of arriving in sailing ships. Tell me what the difference is.
Well, I can't tell the difference, and that's why I have Cam's buddies to help me work through all these issues. And thanks for your opinion, Miles, and we'll hear from you next week.
Thank you.
No problem. See you later. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
G'day, Cam. Sorry I was late. I'm just driving.
That's all right, Jack. Now, you might have heard the news over the weekend that Winston Peters has said that Maori are not indigenous to New Zealand. What's your thoughts on that?
Totally agree with him. Always have.
Oh, come on, that's not. That's or just agreed with him on the indigenous thing, or always agreed with Winston Peters?
On the indigenous thing.
I nearly got you there.
The Maori Ori, I think that has something to say about that.
Yeah, exactly.
If they hadn't all been eaten.
Yeah. What about then the comments from Christopher Luxon, who said that Winston Peters is wrong, and David Seymour, who said that it's ugly politics and that Winston's irrelevant and he hasn't delivered anything and this is his last hurrah at trying to be relevant?
Well, the first thing, Chris Hipkins has to say that because he's got to appease his Maori friends. He's got heaps of them.
I meant Christopher. I meant Christopher Luxon. Christopher Luxon said he was wrong.
Okay. I think anything Chris Luxon says, he's afraid of actually speaking his mind. He's just grasping, thinking, I don't want to make a mistake with whatever I say. So he's just saying everything that's safe for him.
And Seymour?
Seymour, well, he doesn't want competition. He wants to. He doesn't want Winston Peters in his trifecta, because otherwise his power will be diminished.
You think it's as shameless as that?
Yep. Don't you?
Yeah, I actually do. But this is Cam's Buddies, and I want your views. Everyone knows what my views are.
Oh, that's my view.
So to summarise, Winston Peters is dead right on this. Christopher Luxon is just being woke, and David Seymour is trying to stave off competition for votes.
Yes. I told you my policy, we should all become Maoris tomorrow, the whole of New Zealand. Then there'll be no problem.
Yeah, if we all said...
Just go to hospital. Are you a Maori? Yes. I'll go to the top of the list.
Yeah, it would destroy the system, wouldn't it, if we all self-identified as Maori and Indigenous?
Yes. Why don't we do it?
Well, it might be the way that we all have to go to get rid of this inherent racism that's being brought into our society that no one asked for or wanted.
That's my belief.
Well, thank you for your call tonight, Jack, and I welcome you to Cam's Buddies again next week.
Thanks. See you later.
See you. Good afternoon, Jimmy. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
G'day, Cam. how are you?
Always good. Always good. Now, a question I've got for Cam's buddies tonight, Jimmy, is what do you think of Winston Peters' statement that Maori are not indigenous to New Zealand?
I suspected highly that this would be the subject for Cam's buddies today, Mr. Slater. So I think that Winston is technically correct under the old definition of indigenous, but however the Marxists have a new definition of indigenous. So according to them, he's wrong. And if you read their definition, he's wrong.
It's all about feels, isn't it, the new definition? It's all about how you feel, not about what reality is.
Yeah, it's honestly about inclusiveness and feeling and victimhood and all the usual tick boxes that seem to crop up these days. So, but I mean, Winston is a Maori, and he's got the right to say this, and good on him.
So it's a free speech issue, is what you're saying?
Absolutely, he can say this, and everyone's got the right to tell him to pipe down. But there's a lot of people that support him, and a lot of people believe him. And New Zealand's had Maori culture shoved down our throats for the last 3 years, and so a lot of people were potentially overusing it as a counter-offensive. We're potentially just not in a very nice place with race relations, I guess.
What do you think then about, this view that Winston's got is something he's held for decades and said many, many times before. So what do you think about the media making a big song and dance about it? Because this is old news. I can remember him saying this in the 90s. So the media have made this big fuss, and then they've gone out to get a gotcha quote from Christopher Luxon where he said that Winston Peters is wrong, and then they've got another gotcha quote from David Seymour, and David Seymour says, well, this is just a sad old man who's irrelevant. What do you think about the media and, in particular, those two leaders who may actually have to work with Winston Peters?
Well, the two leaders working with Winston is going to be interesting negotiations. The media, I just don't have much faith in. They're just after clicks. They're trying to monetize whatever they can, and this is a good clicking headline grabber, right? So, I just don't really care what the media say. They're just trying to drive revenue because they desperately need it, and they don't really investigate the issue or try to understand it. They just try to agitate and get clicks. And frankly, I personally don't read it or anything. So, yeah.
So do you think Luxon's right that Winston's wrong?
I don't know. It depends what definition you go by. I'm not a Māori person. I don't really particularly. It doesn't affect me. I just don't know. I don't know. It depends on whose perspective you believe in. Winston is a Māori, so how can Luxon, who's Pākehā, tell him he's wrong? Seems a bit weird. But yeah, I just honestly don't know. I don't know. A lot of people I know believe what Winston's saying, but a lot of it's out of spite as well as out of belief.
You might be true.
Luxon's just being woke. He's not thinking about the answer. He's just saying what the woke want to hear to try and appease people that never vote for him. So, yeah, it's a strange topic, but it's certainly good that Winston's chucking it out there in the election and making some people potentially have to answer some difficult questions. Someone should ask Shane Jones what he thinks.
No, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll call him up and ask him. Sounds like a good idea.
He's a genuine up north Maori, and he's a really highly intelligent guy. He's the best Te Reo speaker in Parliament, and he's in Winston's team. So I'd like to see what he has to say about it.
Well,
I think it probably is an opinion.
Well, it's an opinion, and they're like noses, aren't they? Everyone's got one.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Depends which side of the fence you're on, isn't it?
Isn't the worst thing is that because Winston has uttered an opinion, that the media and other political leaders have moved to try and shut down debate on that. They don't. It's almost like they don't want to have the debate on that.
Because there's no right or wrong answer. Only their answer is correct.
Mm.
You know, and that's, whereas if people are mouthing out their answers, they don't want to hear it. You're right.
Yeah. So it's a form of censorship by shouting the person down.
Yeah, it is. And Winston's certainly not wrong. I mean, I don't know if he's right. He's certainly probably not being racist.
Well, I guess DNA would tell us what was right and what was wrong. We have to trust the science, right? It's what we've been told for the last 4 years. Trust the science.
Suit the science when it suits you.
Yeah.
Follow
exactly.
the science when it suits you, Cam.
Yeah.
This is why the woke will always come undone, because the twisty, bendy arguments will always unravel. That's why remember when wear the masks?
Yeah.
Then recently the CDC in the US was saying, don't wear the mask. They don't protect you from forest fire smoke in Hawaii. Just the science suits whatever the narrative is. You know, it's just destroyed so many people's faith in it.
Yeah.
Such a shame. And that's why Winston chucking bombs out there like this is great. You know,
it's entertaining, isn't it?
It's massively entertaining. I've never had so many friends texting me about this particular comment. You know, it's doing what Winston wants, is getting him, attention. And
getting him attention. All right. Well, thank you, Jimmy, for sharing your views on that statement and the various.
No worries. Thanks, mate.
All right. I'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Cam.
Okay. See you. G'day, Marcus. Welcome to Cam's Buddies.
Hey, Cam. How you doing, mate?
I'm fantastic, as always. I'm on the radio.
As always.
Having fun. Always having fun. I got a fun question for you tonight. You might have heard on the weekend Winston Peters talking about what he believes is a fact that Maori are not Indigenous to New Zealand. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I did see that, and I actually shared it on Facebook and thought it was kind of Winston Peters being Winston Peters. You know, it's clearly election time right now, and we need some headlines, so that's a good way to get them. But I 100% agree with him, mate. I mean, at the end of the day, there's you got to ask what Indigenous means, I guess. I mean, what's a definition of Indigenous? And then you have to look at when the definition was actually written and if it hasn't been changed and that sort of thing. But as far as I understand the word, it means from the place that you're talking about and the original. So, I mean, there's plenty of evidence that there was other people here before the Māori. So, Moriori's, of course, and there's some ruins, I think Celtic ruins up in Waipua Forest up near Tanamahuta.
Yeah.
That we're not even allowed to look at. 75 years they've locked it all up. Why? Why is that? You got to ask some questions, Especially obviously over the last. Yeah, well, I mean, over the last 3 years, not enough people were asking why, and we've got ourselves into this state, and now we're looking at everything with sort of a side glance, going, what's going on here then? And I was thinking about that the other day, actually, before Winston Peters brought it up, I think, about Indigenous people and all this two co-governance rubbish that's going through at the moment. And I was thinking about it, going, there seems to be some sort of agenda going on some way that they only want one side of the story, like always. And I started thinking about this because I remember it was back in 2000, I think, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Where they discovered those stone walls up in Waipua Forest, and everyone got really interested in it. And then the Department of Conservation locked it all up and said, no, it's too sensitive. You can't go in there. And no one's been in there since. So,
you sound like a conspiracy theorist, Marcus.
Maybe. Ask my friends, mate. Conspiracy theorist. I'm proud to be. That's my pronouns.
Yeah, exactly. What about what all the other party leaders have said, that Winston Peters is wrong, and in particular Christopher Luxon, who said he's wrong, and David Seymour, who's called it ugly politics?
Okay, well, it's over then. I mean, we don't have to discuss it anymore. He just said it's wrong. We believe Christopher Luxon over Winston Peters. Let's not use our own brains, eh? We'll just say and do what he says. I mean, it's politicking. Like I said, I mean, I'm sure Winston is doing this on purpose to get some headlines, and good on him, because that's what you got to do as a politician.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, you have to ask the question why, and you have to actually start looking at it, and thinking about it with your own brain. And so I don't really care what Christopher Luxon or David Seymour or anyone wants to call it, dirty politics or whatever they want to do. You'd know that term, mate. So, I mean, at the end of it all, just use your own brain and ask your own questions. I mean, the facts are, we know that there's no dispute Moriori were here. You know, the last one died in, was it 1930 or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
And they were a peace-loving tribe from all accounts, from what I've read about it. And how well did that end up for them? You know, I guess you could just say that the Maori are lucky that the colonists from Britain weren't like themselves when they came in and colonised the place.
Well, there's plenty of places around the world that have been colonised by far worse organisations than the British Empire.
Exactly right. I mean, we're in a privileged position now to look back in one-eyed viewpoint of history, and like I've always said, the victors write the history books, and you can look back and you can say, oh, you know, we were hard done by and stole our land and all that sort of thing. And whilst many of it might be true, the alternative of the time and the norm of the day was, well, actually, you're pretty bloody lucky that we're actually talking to you and trying to form a treaty. Because back then, they just went in there and thought, oh, they look weird, let's shoot them.
Well,
you know, you got to look at everything.
The Romans did colonisation far differently, that's for sure.
You know, I mean, exactly. I mean, the British have in the past as well, of course. But, I mean, at the end of it all, you can't say it's an absolute lie, just like you can't say the vaccine's safe and effective. I mean, prove it. Just don't use your words, prove it.
Yeah, sure.
So let's open up. Yeah, exactly. Let's open up the Waipua Forest. Let's go in there and let's investigate and see who was in there. And let's see if it was Celtic people in there before anyone knew of anything, you know?
Oh, Celtic or Vikings or something like that. No, you never know.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Exactly. Apparently there were some reports from the original Māori when the colonists came down here of fair-headed colonists beforehand. I was reading something about a pot or something like that the Māoris used as a cooking vessel or something that they didn't make. So,
oh, that's interesting. Anyway, I'd like to see that.
I'm just a crazy conspiracy theorist, mate. What do I know?
You're a bogan from out west.
I am indeed, mate. I was just sitting on my boat having a cigar before I rang.
Wow, as you're entitled to in a free country, even though they charge us extortionate amounts of tax for the things.
Oh, they're trying to take that away from us too, mate. And first they go for the guns, and then they go for the cigars.
Yeah, cigars are a symbol of freedom.
Let's have a think. I mean, we're talking about the Morioris, like I said. They're a peace-loving tribe, and how well did that end up for them, you know? Oh, let's just do what we're told, and they buggered off to Chatham Islands, and then the Māori went over there and found them and killed them all.
Well, you know what they say, you can't comply your way out of tyranny.
No, exactly. Exactly right, my friend.
Thank you for your comments on Cam's Buddies this afternoon, and we'll talk next week.
All right, mate. Cheers. Have a good night.
Thank you. My buddies can be blunt and brutal at times, but that's why I love their thoughts. They never hold back. They're unafraid to challenge me or my thinking. There's been many, many times where my views and reckons have been formed by these free and frank discussions. Let us know what you think of Cam's Buddies by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Would you like to be a part of reviving honest media? At RCR, we're on a mission to do just that. We report on critical, censored stories and hold those in positions of power to account. As Paul Brennan says, it's a good mission. Now there's an easy way to support RCR and at the same time receive some amazing benefits. Our Foundation Membership Club is here. As a member, you'll enjoy a host of exclusive benefits, including a daily bite-sized news digest, a backstage pass to RCR, and discounted merchandise. Find out all you need to know about our Foundation membership now at www.realitycheck.radio.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Well, it's that time of the show where we get into the mailbag, and we've got a few negative ones this week, so I'm looking forward to reading those out. First up, though, we have some general feedback from last week. This is from Tracy. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, expecting a different result, like voting for a major political party or any current politician and expecting things in New Zealand to change. To make a real difference, change the way you vote. Anything else is a wasted vote. Vote for who you believe in. And Anonymous says, hi, Cam, we need to come together. The Freedom Party must stand. The country needs to stand together as one. Anonymous also says, I just listened to Cam Slater's latest podcast. I think this is important to listen to, given there are so many well-meaning parties. I don't think the system is quite ready to change, even though so much is broken and going terribly wrong. Not enough people are knowledgeable enough on how the political system works, and that includes me. We can have all the hope in the world, but that won't make the machine change. A healthy dose of realism and compromise has to be employed as we vote, particularly if we want the vote to count. I like how Cam highlights the need to focus on what political parties have in common and work from there. Sound advice in this crazy divided world we live in. Thanks for making me think and look at things from another perspective. Another anonymous commenter says, any party leader who won't unite for the common good is suffering from a saviour complex, believing that they are the one, and that if they just believe hard enough and follow the instructions of their spirit guides, they'll get to prove it. If come election day these groups are not all banded together to make a viable option for us, I'll be voting New Zealand First, who at least may have a shot at implementing their policies in Parliament. Tony says, thanks, Cam, for trying to get these minor parties talking to each other. You hit the nail squarely into our puffed up egos and lack of common sense. We all want the same goodies, but are blinded by our own importance rather than saving our country and the coming generations. As I often say, wake up, New Zealand, and switch off those phones that are robbing us of these critical conversations and get some reality into those electronically switched off brains. Great pair of blokes and their supporters. God bless them in their difficult mission. Now for some negative feedback. I've been hoping for some. Here we go. Anonymous says, I hope no one listens to the crunch, aka the narcissist hour. It goes I. The crunch, aka the forlorn hope or the forlorn voice of idiocy. Send Cam to the platform. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Here's another one. And this is a very long rant from Gary and Gay. We look forward to listening to the political panel. However, after last Friday's replay, we are now totally disillusioned. We have worked bloody hard during our working lives, and we feel we deserve the right to vote for whoever we choose. And there's quite a few exclamation marks. Some of our views. How dare you tell us who to vote for? It's our choice who we vote for, not yours. No vote is ever wasted. Maybe. And please stop and think for a moment. Why do you think we listen to RCR? Well, I think you listen to RCR so that you can get the truth. And if you don't like what you're hearing, it doesn't mean it's not the truth. And here's another part of the rant. We've had to put up with successive governments telling us what to do, culminating with Cindyism for the last few years. Take the juice, stay at home, wear a mask, take a test, get a COVID passport, narc on your neighbours. You're a second-class citizen if you don't take the juice. Now watch closely while where the politicians stuff this beautiful country. And they continue. Now it appears we have Slaterism. Don't waste your vote. Vote for Winston. Do as I say. I'm so politically intelligent. Well, I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying be careful what you wish for. And then WTF, who appointed Cameron Slater God? And point 6, Cam, you don't realize the cabal totally control all the Muppets that call themselves our politicians. This includes Winston Bloody Peters, the biggest criminal of the lot. Heaven forbid we did vote for him once and then we realized he's just another bloody liar. Cam, we're starting to wonder if you're a government plant to wreck RCR from the inside out. And the last part, sorry, Cam, but if you don't pull your big head in, we'll not be listening to any program you're involved in. Our sincere apologies if this upsets your precious ego. And heard this recently on RCR, and it totally resonates with us. No vote for the 5 in the hive. Well, Gary and Gay, that's some pretty strong opinions got there. But thankfully, you're entitled to your opinions, and I'm entitled to mine. And don't worry about my precious ego. It's just fine, thanks. Now, about the Democratic Alliance and my interview with Jaap and Joseph. Marlene says, correct, Cam, it's not left versus right anymore, and actually not for a while now. It's authoritarianism versus liberty. And Julian adds, Cam, how does a group under an umbrella party show on the voting paper? Well, they show as their individual parties, Julian, and then the umbrella party collates all of those up and gets to, collate them, bring them together and give them a total percentage. But basically they appear on the voting paper under their own parties. Anonymous says, thanks, Cam, for interviewing Democracy Alliance. I'd heard the name, but I didn't know anything about them. I'd be a freedom voter if they could ally with each other to get over the 5%. Ex-Labour voter. As it stands, I'm left to decide between ACT, National and New Zealand First. My vote will be cast with the aim to prevent a Labour, Green, Maori coalition rather than a conscience or policy. Freedom friends are not going to vote rather than vote for an under-threshold party or the enemy, i.e. all that supported their mandates and refused to acknowledge the protest. Sad situation. And John says, hi, Cam, your discussion with Jaap and Joseph resonated so much around making a real change to the political scene that we currently have. Maybe a chat with Winston might make all the difference. Anonymous says, Cam, just listened to your interview with Jaap and Joseph. They made so much sense about everyone working together. I was saddened to hear that Liz Gunn had pulled her interview with Rodney, and then I heard your comments that she wouldn't come on board and talk to any of you. It's all very confusing, as she needs to be heard if she wants to be the middle Kiwi to vote for New Zealand Loyal. Well, Anonymous, she has now appeared on Reality Check Radio with Rodney Hyde, and so that interview is able to be found on the website for replays. Now, comments about my discussion with David Farrar. Another response to last week. No need to read this one out. Where are we going to, Bronwyn? You are having David Farrar on this evening, but I wanted to say that people arguing about the reallocating of votes are splitting hairs. As far as I can see, this was started by Counterspin, who are strongly supporting NZ Loyal. They pointed out the actual votes were not reallocated, but the unallocated seats in Parliament are shared out proportionally among the parties who do get in. I think they're trying to counter your voice, saying a vote for smaller parties, i.e. NZ Loyal, will be wasted. Perhaps if you just change the way you say it and say reallocated seats rather than votes, it will reduce the amount of argument going on. Yes, Bronwyn, that's absolutely 100% correct. It is not the votes that are reallocated, it's the seats that those votes represent. Sarah from Otaki says, it's not about left and right anymore, it's lost all meaning. It's all about freedom versus control, but the freedom parties want control. Yes, Cam, that's why thoughtful voters choose Democracy New Zealand over other freedom parties. And that is why Democracy New Zealand cannot join a Freedom Alliance party. When Matt King was setting up Democracy New Zealand, he contacted and met with numerous potential coalition partners. Sadly, due to their unrealistic and unworkable desires, these other freedom parties chose to go it alone. Democracy New Zealand is the only uncorrupted freedom party with any chance of making it into Parliament via Northland. Matt King could leap on a horse within the blink of an eye, and it would be graceful and impressive. Democracy New Zealand is the Farmers and Freedom Party. And we've got a long comment here from Kerry. Just a comment or two on that excellent interview. The vexed problem of what happens with party votes deserve thorough discussion. I see people are still arguing this issue out. But as Cam Slater has indicated, David Farrar, who is the boss of Curia Research and responsible for polls that we publish here, is eminently qualified to answer this question. Farah has been studying polling since 1996. Frankly, I feel somewhat vindicated with his response to the wasted vote question. The discussion is well worth listening to and should settle the question for most punters. Personally, I think the better way to address this question of the wasted vote is to refrain from using language such as the wasted vote is allocated to the plus 5% threshold parties, proportionate to their own party vote result, as that is not accurate. However, the effect of wasted votes is better, in my view, expressed as the distinction between electoral seats won by party vote as a matter of being earned by parties' direct campaigning and those extra seats given gratis as a result of the wasted vote. This makes clear that the wasted votes definitely have a bearing on the result for the plus 5% threshold parties. And on another note, I also appreciate Farah's comment re small party polling at roughly 5 minutes into the interview. And I note, and I quote, keep looking at the polls during the campaign. I've never seen a party that's been polling under 3% suddenly in a surprise make 5% on election night. Excellent advice, and as a Freedom Bloc voter, I'll be keeping that in mind. Keep up the good work. Now to my interview with Masako Ganaha. Hi, Cam, re your Japanese interview. Our government also banned quercetin. I know this because a friend's mother couldn't get it for swollen ankles and the doctor told her it was because of COVID bans. He said we would normally prescribe it, but we can't now. Quercetin was one of the inclusions in alternative COVID treatment protocols. I am stunned at your Japanese interview re the similarities regarding COVID and the transgender agenda. My daughter is transgendering and at university for ages studying and employment. Then out of the blue, we're estranged because I don't do unquestioning affirmation or buy into the ideology. It's tragic. But here I am listening to you and your guest, and it's happening everywhere in the world. Far out, Cam. I love listening to you and your interviews. Thanks. Hi, Cam. I lived in Japan for a year. Some Japanese people think Japan is America's dog. Yes, and that's what Masako said. Well, you learn something new every day. I thought Japan was too patriotic to buy into this stuff. Very good to hear of this international pushback. And Anonymous says, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to the clip Cam had with Masako from Japan. Now to Simon Lusk, our political tragic. Wow, that was illuminating and clarifying. Thank you, Cam, from Anonymous. And Lisa Berry says, really enjoyed Simon Lusk's interview on this week's show. I still don't agree with him about Cindy and find it difficult to comprehend how anyone can distinguish between her being a good person privately while her public and political approach to the population of New Zealand has been nothing short of tyrannical. May I never meet her. I've seen and heard enough to traumatize me for all eternity. Keep up the good work. And some comments about my buddies. Hi, Cam, just listening to last week's show on replay. I enjoy your buddies segment, but I was thinking how interesting it would be if you are able to find a caller who doesn't think like you and all of us who listen. My friend who thinks like us has just visited her family in Auckland, and her brother used to be a farmer but is now a teacher indoctrinating our next generation. Has lost count of how many jabs he's had, but he thinks 4 and intends to vote Greens. It would be so interesting to hear you, respectfully of course, talk to someone like this about James Shaw and see how on earth they justify their position, as it just seems unfathomable to me. Keep up the good work. And the final comment from the mailbag this week is about my interview with Rukshan Fernando on 24 August. Thanks for the great interview of Rukshan, Cam. I used to look up at the odd piece you did a number of years ago and always valued your candid truth bombs. LOL. I listened to your story before this one too. I didn't know that all happened to you, mate. Good on you that you're doing well, and I was amazed to hear you are a Christian too. I just didn't know one way or another about your spiritual position, but it didn't make any difference because the truth is the truth. And all I can say is I hear a lot more compassion in you now, probably due to your heart issue, and I would hazard a guess maybe you got a bit serious about your faith too. I'm going to listen to you more for sure And I only actually listened to RCR for the first time a week back when I tuned into the Rodney Hyde interview with Penny Jackson, who is legally taking on Fletcher's for the mandates. That was cool. I am in that case too. Lost my job of 27 years. Work at home always. Give it heaps, mate. Good to hear the peace in your soul too, mate, and going and doing what you do best. All the best. You guys rock. And that's it for the mailbag this week. Please send in your hate mail and all your compliments next week, and we'll read them out on the show again.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
All right, that's it for The Crunch this week. We're getting to the pointy end of the election campaign, and this is where the rubber meets the road. The Labour Party has seen 5 polls in 7 days eviscerate their support. It is all over for them now as the polls reinforce voters' gut feelings and no one backs a loser. The minor parties need a serious dose of reality too. They are simply not going to make it. It's sad, but that's politics. It isn't too late for them to fold their tents and live to fight another day. On Tuesday night, Matt King got another reality check. And you'll remember the RCR poll a few weeks ago that showed him in 4th place. Well, the Taxpayers Union commissioned a poll in Northland as well, and now Matt King is in 5th place. And that's totally different from what he's been telling his supporters and public meetings in Northland. Shane Jones, on the other hand, is moving up in the ranking and may well come a creditable 2nd. But for now, Matt King's dreams and those of the remaining supporters of Democracy New Zealand can know for sure the dream is over. Again, it's sad, but that's politics. With just 5 weeks to go and just 2 weeks until early voting begins, it's vitally important that you continue to keep yourselves well informed. And that's why we're here at Reality Check Radio, to give you both sides of any story or issue, and it's a job we all love doing. Educate yourselves, make a difference by voting, and continue your support of stations like this. It's been a real pleasure having you all back this week. I'm loving all your feedback, including the negative ones, and really enjoying talking to so many people sharing their thoughts on politics, life, and everything in between. But there's more, plenty more, in this election campaign that we need to crunch into. So a big shout out to all of you, and thank you for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore this beautiful game of politics. Don't forget email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview. And let's make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Now stay tuned for a breakfast show repeat coming up next, with features including Money Talks with my buddy Farzan Irani and Perigo's perspective with the one and only Lindsay Perigo. Looking forward to having you join me again next Thursday at 4 p.m. for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.